Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by Trainer Road. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Zimmerman.
Hello.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And we're going to answer more of your cycling and triathlon related questions today. You can submit them at trainerroad.com/podcast. And just recently, actually, and you can join us every week on YouTube, by the way. It's pretty fun. It's usually Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. It's cool to have listeners joining us there. You can chat with other listeners. You can ask questions. Then we usually answer those at the end. And also on our YouTube channel, we just put up a whole series of a playlist of videos. It was actually first-person footage from my camera during EWS North Star. And for those that don't know what EWS is, that's the Enduro World Series. So that's the premier Enduro series in the world. Enduro World Series. So it's got the best enduro racers there are.
It's all in the name.
Believe it or not. Best enduro racers out there. And then us average Joes get the opportunity to race something called the EWS 100, which just means you do 100% of the course. And that's the one that I did. And holy cow, it was insanely tough.
Okay, I just want to say something.
Yeah.
Producer Tucker, can you please put links to each one of these videos that we did, but also in Slack, Jonathan put 2 videos of like side footage, because you get what's called the GoPro effect, where your footage looks gnarly, but it's not as gnarly as race day.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And then you watch the pros
Proper
go through
justice.
these rock gardens
Yes.
and like dying. What was so this North Star, that's where we go and train sometimes. I've never ridden any of these trails that you've done, but what did the pros say about these trails?
They said it was the roughest EWS. A lot of them were saying it's the roughest they've ever ridden. I heard from a number of different riders firsthand that it was harder than any downhill track they've had in the last handful of years.
Wow.
Which is pretty crazy. And the dust mixed with the rocks, that was the hardest part for them. Because in some spots you had dust that was, if you were to step down with your foot, you just sink through it. It's like extremely light dust. Mm-hmm. And it goes up.
Moon dust.
Moon dust, we call it. Yeah. It goes up to about mid-calf, so your lower leg.
That deep.
But then inside of that, there's a knee-deep rut.
Oh.
And the thing is, you can't wholly see the rut, and so it's kind of like a fun game where it's like, I wonder what's down at the bottom of that rut.
It's not my idea of fun.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to ride, and a lot of riders, even the pro riders, are finding it really difficult.
I haven't watched the video yet, but I'm just hoping Richie is just like picking you apart.
Yeah, and there we go. So Richie Rude, Enduro World Champ, not current World Champ, but I believe he's won 2 titles in the past. But incredible rider, Red Bull athlete, rides for the Yeti Factory team and plenty of other very notable companies. He's one of the best in the world. Mm-hmm. He actually came to Trainer Road HQ, and we sat down and watched our videos, just like you've done with Pete, Nate, and just how I've done with Keegan, that sort of thing. And Richie critiqued every one of my stages. It's really fun. And he was like... He's a pretty quiet guy, but he was very kind about how he was pointing out I was taking terrible lines, but it's actually pretty funny if you listen to it, because just listen to it and know that he was being kind, and then it actually makes it really funny.
You can hear the restraint.
Yeah, yeah, he was being very kind in spots. Like, I think at one point he said, "Yeah, you went over a lot of weird rocks. Like rocks aren't really weird. It's just my line was really bad, But it was very kind of him. So, but it's really cool because we got a ton of takeaways, and this is something totally different for us with race analysis here. And if you want to check these out, I could not recommend it enough. It will change how you road ride too, because really a lot of it comes down to line choice, what we're talking about, and seeing how he sees a course. It's like a different perspective. Like, he sees it with a totally different set of eyes than us average folk.
Sure.
Jonathan, how can I see these videos?
And go to youtube.com/trainerroad. And there's a whole playlist that we have there that's called EWS North Star. Cool. It's within our race analysis playlist. You can also go to blog.trainerroad.com, and I put them all in one spot. And the cool part there is I put down the data for each stage, which we tracked time coasting, time in zone 7, so up at the very top. Normalized power, which is just hilarious because sometimes I think one of them is like 49 watts, right? Because it was just straight down. Average gradient, the time and the distance of the stage, as well as my time and placement within my class, EWS 100, and then Richie's time and his placement. And that's the crazy thing.
That's what we want to know is how much faster were you than, just kidding, how much slower were you than Richie?
So after day
percentage.
1, I was 11% off of Richie, and I think after day 2, which, spoiler alert, if you look in there, and you have to find it, you have to find the nugget, but I make a pretty big mistake at one point. So you'll be able to find that. I think that I was over 20% No, I was 15% off of his time.
You're not very good, dude.
I know. It's kind of funny. Like,
there's always somebody better, right?
2 weeks ago, like, Lee was building me up and all this stuff on the podcast. And then it's like, and that's also one thing I wanted to say. So some learnings with this. First of all, the pro field of enduro. And I ignorantly had this perspective that maybe the top 15 is crazy stacked, maybe 20, but then after that, it's probably just like pack fodder. That is not the case at all. So I was sitting just within top 20 before the final stage, and I would have placed, I think, 89th out of 95 in the pros.
Wow.
So that shows how far back, like, and how stacked that field is. So that was one thing I learned. They're incredible riders, all of them. On the training side, we shared a lift with Cody Kelly, who's another pro enduro racer, and Pete Morris, who did it with us too. We were talking to him, and we brought up the fact that to pre-ride, it's like a totally different deal. So when you pre-ride for Enduro World Series, you go to the top of the stage, and each stage is only open for a very short window of time, like basically an hour, right? And when you get to the top, they have a guy and he checks your number and he says, okay, can't come back through. So you only get to start at the top and then go down. You can hike as much as you want, but you can't hike on the course. You have to go off course and hike through the bushes, and then you can get back on. But I was like, cool, we'll take one run where we kind of slowly check everything out, then we'll come back up and we'll hit one at race pace. And we could not do that. So I kind of just like, instead of thinking, I just went in like halfway, and I was like, yeah, I'll just check parts out when I need to, but then I'll kind of push race pace. And I basically got this mediocre experience coming down the trail where I wasn't pushing hard enough to really see how it developed at race pace.
It's too much to take in on a single recon route.
Yeah, and I should have hiked, but I was like, oh, that could be really tough. And it would be really hard. And Cody Kelly was saying that actually in the off season, he does a ton of hiking, and then he even went out this year because he said that at some of the bigger EWS races, he said that he wouldn't even be able to race well because his legs were so fried because he wasn't used to hiking with his bike up a mountain. Oh, wow. So he said that he doesn't shy away from doing that in training at all, which is really kind of interesting, the demands that you have to prepare for. Pacing, they don't just go all out from the top and hope it works out. Even on these short stages, Richie was saying he's still pacing himself. Like, he's not going as hard as he possibly can right at the very beginning, which is interesting. Most of us don't think that way and don't do that. Equipment, it's so brutal on equipment, and tune into the videos because you'll get a lot of insight on that. We talk a lot about the equipment choices that he makes versus what I make and how I'm doing it wrong. We both had the same bike.
Wait to watch these.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
We both had the same bike though. So we both had the Yeti SB150, which I was happy to have big wheels and a ton of travel. Holy cow, it was rough. On the nutrition side of things, I think that this is something that a lot of people could do better with, even the pros, is to just always be eating. It's so demanding on your body. I know you're not pedaling a ton because sometimes you ride up, sometimes you take a lift, depending on what's designated by the organizer.
Just rough routes are in general.
Oh my gosh.
I equate it to wearing a weight vest. You don't realize how much extra work you're doing until you take that weight vest off, or in this case, undernourish yourself.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's a great way to look at it. It's really tough, and you can hear my breathing on these stages when I'm doing 49 normalized power, and I'm just I sound like a basset hound at the park or something. So, and then the other thing is, as far as training with that, man, for enduro racing, and it's a ton of fun. If anybody hasn't done an EWS, you can do the EWS 80. So EWS 80 is usually like 80% of the stages in the race, but then the ones where it would have been really tough, they have you skip out and they do ones that aren't as tough. So it's definitely for riders that don't want the full challenge of riding that course.
And when it's an EWS 100, you don't really have an A line, B line. You just...
It's the A line.
Yeah. There's just...
Yeah, you walk, basically.
Okay.
That's, yeah. So, but EWS 80, if you had any sort of trepidation, that would be the one to do. And what an incredible...
Could I have done
event.
80?
Yeah, I think so.
He looked up the second leg.
It would have been challenging because I'm trying to think of exactly what stages they did. It would have been challenging, but people don't realize you're good now. Like, so yeah, you'd be able to do it.
Yeah,
It'd be
I
good.
don't know.
It was a cool experience. But if you are going to do this, two things. We've talked so much about strength training, and these guys really need it. You have to be strong. And you'll see when producer Tucker puts these videos up in forum.trainerroad.com, just search for episode 218, you'll see the pro riders, and they go down the backside of rocks, which you'll see this in the video too. Richie's motivation for that is very different from mine. But when he goes down the backside of rocks, you'll see them almost forcefully slam their bikes bikes down. That takes so much strength, so much coordination, skill, agility, all of that stuff. These athletes have so much strength. They have to through their whole body.
Yeah, I mean, some of those stretches in particular, the noise sounds like they're crashing all the way down.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I'm looking for bodies and bikes flying different directions, and no, it's just them railing through these super rocky stretches.
You know, in like elementary school, when you do those like leapfrog things, you go down and you be like little frog and you jump up.
Yeah.
Do that for 8 minutes as hard as you can.
While pedaling too.
Well,
Every once in a while, you have
just
to
that
throw
is
in
enough.
800 watts.
Like you just gotta like if you just try to explode out of that, like every 3
Just
seconds,
do really
do that.
explosive burpees for 8 minutes. See how that goes.
And then have something that's also, while you're doing it, have people pushing you, like laterally, to throw you off balance and try to throw you off. It's really tough. And so that partnered with repeatability. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So our gravity plan builds specifically on that. If you want something that's like, the gravity plan really focuses also on like a lot of being able to really do a lot of peak power. And if you're less concerned with that, more about repeatability, even the cyclocross plan would be a great choice for that sort of thing. But I feel like if more athletes, like in my division in the EWS 100, maybe even in the pro stuff, I don't know, but in the EWS 100, if they had done interval training like what we have in those plans, it would be a way more enjoyable experience, because almost everybody we talked to was saying, yeah, I'm just so, but after 30 seconds, I can't handle anything because I'm so blown out.
That's
I'm so
conditioning.
tired. And that's really what it comes down to. So.
You said something that made me think of my race 2 weeks ago. You said about doing the race course, like not at race pace and not like slow.
Yeah.
I did I think it's called Suisun Crit or something like that.
Sassoon.
Sassoon. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. It looks like Suisun. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just looks like a normal 4-corner crit. And what happened on that race is when you go through at like the corners at 25, 27, they're fine. But then at 20, or 30, 33, I clipped a pedal so hard. It's on video. I almost died. My back wheel hopped like on a breakaway.
Oh,
I felt like
scary.
such a noob.
Saved it though.
I saved it. But afterwards, over 2 races, 6 people I talked to clipped pedals. And it was only on the fast laps. Because in the other apps, everyone was pedaling, and there would get kind of like a yo-yo effect. So you were like kind of used to pedaling through the corners. But when your speed went up just a little bit, and it was because it was like a little bit off camber because of drainage. You know how roads do that?
Yeah.
And so if you just hit the right kind of angle, then you would clip. And that's no fun. And one person, I think, we don't... you can see in the video, a guy went down. He was in a breakaway. He doesn't know what happened. I think he clipped a pedal. But
sometimes it's hard to separate what actually happened because so many things happen at once, right? Yeah.
And I've had that happen, and I've seen it happen quite a lot with preem laps, because you're going full gas for that line, and that first right-hander, usually a right-hander, you're carrying more speed than you have at any other point during the race. And you still try to pedal through it just like you did on every previous lap. And there's so many crashes happen after preem laps.
Yeah. And you're a bit foggy brain too. You're not clear. And adding to that, there were these trails. I've ridden a lot of these trails that you'll see in the race analysis videos. I've ridden them many times, and they would change. And because the event was going on, they changed kind of the course. So we would take a turn off and go to a different route. And because I didn't pay attention enough in pre-riding and hit them at race pace, I didn't have any braking points sorted out for those turns. So once you hit things at race pace, it totally changes. And also when you go race pace, sometimes you just kind of go into like a subconscious operating state where you're focusing on one thing but letting other things just be handled subconsciously. Sure. And that's what I was doing in a lot of cases, and that's why I was following old routes, right, instead of following the new ones. So tons of learnings, and it's also it was very humbling to basically have my performance critiqued for sure by the world's best, but really cool. And I think there's a ton of takeaways. So everybody, if you're listening to this right now, or if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up right now, but check out those videos. I think you'll like them a lot. So, and Richie did a heck of a job. This is his first time doing anything like this, and bravo, Richie. I feel like you did great. So, last little bit, next week is going to be a different podcast because we will not be here. Nate and I won't be here. We'll be over across the pond over at Eurobike. So if you're there, say hi. Hopefully we'll see you guys.
Can you say the name of the town that we're going to?
Friedrichshafen.
Yeah, I think you did it.
I'm sure I'm butchering it.
It's
I don't
Germany.
know how to say.
That's pretty close.
Yeah. I don't think my Spanish will help at all in Germany. So, but say hi if you're going to be there. It'd be cool to see you guys. We are going to have bikes. I don't know what sort of riding we're going to be able to get in, but we are going to have our bikes with us and do some sort of riding.
That's to commute into the show.
Yeah.
Because it's a big long line.
Yeah, we need to get some pedaling in, right? So jumping straight into Jeff's question. question. It's timely for this season. He says, how do you plan race strategy for a cyclocross race? And how might this differ across categories and for someone trying to place in the top half of the field versus being at the pointy end of the race? That's a really astute observation, by the way, that it's carried out differently depending where you're at. It says, and doesn't matter as much as other disciplines, or is cyclocross really more of a function of skill and fitness? He says that I'm from Austin, and our courses tend to be hot, fast, dry, and technical, which is a bit different than racing up north. We start racing in early October, and that can run through December. He says, I've learned a lot about road, crit, and mountain bike racing listening to the podcast, but would love to hear more of your thoughts on cyclocross. Perhaps he hasn't listened to that season when we were like hot onto cyclocross, right?
All the time.
Yeah. He says, I'm 46 and a Cat 5 racer, and this will be my third season of cyclocross racing. Currently weigh 145 pounds with a 209 FTP. I just started sweet spot based low volume, and he says I'm supplementing it with strength training, cyclocross skills and drills, and outdoor rides, and plan to switch to the specialty plan in late September. So he's going to skip build. I would actually recommend that he goes through build. He might see some pretty good benefits there. But just to say, he says, I have 6 to 8 hours a week to train. My main goal is to try, and he says in quotes, try not to suck, which to me means getting better at the skills, especially cornering at race pace, showing up with decent fitness, and racing hard. I'd also like to improve my mid-pack placement in the Masters category and see if I can pick off a top 5 spot better in one of the Cat 4 to 5 races this year. So, do you think racing smarter, given my fitness and approach, will help me achieve my goals, or do I need to just recalibrate my expectations for the season? It's a really good question.
Okay. For Cat 5 mid-pack, there's no strategy.
Yeah.
Like,
You just go, right?
Forget strategy.
and even there might be one strategy is I could see people going too hard at the very beginning. So let people go away a little bit.
Yes.
If they're fast, and you might get a little bit of a draft, but I bet you in your category more of a even pacing throughout the race. So in the second half of the race, you're going to be taking minutes off people per lap.
Oh yeah, I think.
How many times do you guys see that where it's like 9 or
Every race.
more in Cat 5 than any other division too, right? Like, it's so I do think there's definitely strategy to be had. It's not like I don't think the other racers around you can expect like really savvy tactics from. You shouldn't expect that. But man, if you adhere to a like riding within yourself and making sure that you aren't going out too hard.
As you move up the ranks into the higher categories, the more competitive categories, there are people who will go off that fast and will hold it the whole race.
Yeah.
I don't know how common those people are in the 4 or 5s.
Rare.
And it happens. Another thing too is so when you're in Cat 1, everyone's pretty close in fitness.
Yeah.
Or at least unless you've been not riding for a while.
Closer is a fair assessment. Yeah,
exactly.
Or a fair guess. Yeah.
So when you get that little benefit of draft, even though you're not going that fast, that helps. Line choice, and I don't know, it just feels better to be with somebody.
Yes.
But in your category, there'll be those people that should be a Cat 1, maybe Cat 1 on the road, and they're stepping through, and they're going to start off at such a higher pace than you, or they're a Cat 1 mountain biker. That's probably a better example.
Yep, and you don't want to ride with them.
Exactly. You don't want to ride them. They will make your race so much slower. And like I was saying, I've seen it where every lap's like 7 minutes. Then it goes 7, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then
Totally.
if you can keep it at 7:30 the whole time or 7:45, you'll beat those people.
100%.
Try to keep those consistent lap times.
Something else to add to that too is, especially with Cat 5, the lower categories, as soon as you hit your first obstacle, you're going to see very inventive ways of going over that obstacle.
It's a nice way to put it.
Yes. Instead of, you look at Cat 1 and I'm sure it'll look like pretty textbook, right? Riders kind of have it figured out. And what I'm getting at with that is that expect it to be a bottleneck and expect it to be a bit crazy. And if you are, pinned and a bit foggy brained because you're going so hard, and then you're stuck next to a bunch of people that are all caught on some sort of obstacle, it's a great way to lose a lot of time. However, a great way for you to gain time is if you're staying within yourself, you're probably not with those crazy people that are going too hard. And when you get to those situations, you just get to make up free seconds because they're stopped and they're panicking and screwing up. I mean, man, I still do that. I get into a cross race and I'm so excited, and I go up to the first like a sand hill or something like that, and I get off the bike and I'm fumbling and I'm tripping, and it happens to all of us. So.
Yeah, be smooth, and because that happens all the time. It gets a bottleneck, and then what you do out of it, I need to do 1,200 watts. Right? I just sprint out of this.
I just messed up, so I need to go way harder.
Yeah, to make up for that.
It's like most people drive their cars. They bomb into a red light, slam on the brakes, and then full gas out of the red light.
Yeah.
When they can just roll into it slowly, maybe not even touch the brakes, and roll back out of it slowly.
exactly.
Yeah, that's the other way. Jonathan's saying is like if you're a little bit slower, especially at the beginning,
Yeah.
you're going to hit that. The light's going to turn green while you're still rolling.
Exactly right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's
That's a real
comparable.
thing for sure.
Yeah.
Look at good cyclocross racers. So Jeremy Powers is retired, but Jeremy Powers is a great example of this. Tobin Ortenblad is another great example, I feel like, of this, of being very smooth.
Oh, Cody Kaiser.
Cody
He's like the
Kaiser.
smoothest guy.
So smooth, right? The way that and it's not just over barriers. I mean, in everything, their speed is very metered. And that was a shock for us. If you listen back, maybe 3 years ago, we were at Interbike and Keegan
Vegas.
Swenson stayed with us and we did Cross Vegas and we looked at our performance versus his. And and it was crazy to see how smooth he was,
It's like he's
relatively
doing a
speaking,
time trial
with his power.
We're doing a criterium, and he's doing a time trial. I mean,
Yeah.
but by comparison.
Yeah, and we don't need to spoil anything here. He was much faster than us. So but meanwhile, we're jamming as hard as we can, right? We're sprinting, and then we come down a little hill, and we sprint again, and then we looked at his, and we're like, man, you could have pushed a lot harder up that little hill. And it's like, yeah, but I also did it a minute faster than you every lap. So a lot of these top riders, they're smoother than you think. Cyclocross courses force things to be inherently punchy, but that doesn't mean if you have like really low fitness, like a low threshold, for example, then it is going to be more punchy just because, grass adds extra drag and that takes more out of you, relatively speaking, than a person with a high threshold. But man, it really helps to smooth it out. Are you racing cross this year, Nate?
Probably not. I have a whole bunch of travel.
Yeah.
So it's hard to fit in races and stuff. What about you?
I went.
And I'm planning on it. Just a handful of races. I'm probably going to do like ride to the race, do the race, ride back home.
I like that idea.
Yeah, make it kind of just a nice Saturday training day.
Could
I guess.
happen. Could happen.
You might do it, huh?
Maybe. I liked one of the things that Jeff said where he asks if CX is really more of a function of skills and fitness, because I don't want to underplay the value, even in the lower categories, of practicing your skills.
Oh,
I mean,
huge.
Like if you can do it
Massive.
3 days a week, do it 3 days a week. I know you only have so many hours to work with, but as many times as you can get yourself off the bike and practice your dismounts, remounts. I think, honestly, the turning, I'd leave that for race day. I would worry more about getting over obstacles without, while preserving speed.
Depends on your level. For
Yeah,
me,
for sure.
turning's a low-hanging fruit. Like when I come back now, it's going to be...
Don't get me wrong. I feel like that is, but I feel like I practice it better when I'm forced to go a little faster than I want to. And I know that might seem a little backwards because I'm figuring it out in the moment, but I don't push myself at the same speeds in practice that I will in a race.
And a lot of people talk about, and that's why clinics are really good, because clinics usually put you into that scenario. One way you can do it is, and you can get cones for so cheap, by the way. You can go to like any...
Make PVC barriers.
Yeah,
that
you can...
tip,
yeah.
so when you hit them, you don't...
Yep, you can bring all these things out to a park, and you can be a weird adult that plays around riding a bicycle in a circle in grass. But it's fine. You'll be okay. But when you do this, like one thing that I can recommend to kind of force the race pace side of things is set a cone as a braking point, and basically always accelerate to a certain speed. So like, let's say that you just want to go through turns and you want to do it at 10 miles an hour, right? In a tight turn. So accelerate to 10 miles an hour, then have a cone set up for your braking point and give yourself plenty of room so that you can brake and feel comfortable and go around that turn. And then as hopefully you're practicing proper technique with all this, but then that cone just step by step gets a little closer to that turn and it'll force you to hit things at a higher speed. And, that's one way I guess you can do it without using the race scenario, just to bring it on. The other thing I think that a lot of people miss with cyclocross too is on the braking side. We talked about this, but we're so used to, especially from road racing, we're used to our brakes being the instant response to anything not going all right. Right?
Sure.
It's not good to do it on road either, right? Because if somebody's crashing up in the pace line ahead of us, we don't necessarily want to slam on our brakes as much as adjust our line.
It's a fair response. It's not very sensible.
But it's definitely something that I find in road and mountain biking, it's very alive and well. And in cyclocross, I almost wish that I could have like time spent braking. That would be a metric that I would love to track, because if I spent less time braking, I guarantee you I may not have as high of a peak speed, but I would have a higher average speed.
I'm surprised we don't have that
That
yet.
would be a good metric.
I know, right? You could do it with accelerometers, I would think. Maybe it's tricky with cross though, huh? Because all the bumps, but
Have to be something tied to your brake lever, maybe.
yeah, something like that. But anyways, and I know that there is a braking power meter. I see it pop up on Pink Bike like once every 6 months. But anyways, it's I think that would be interesting. So less brakes, more smooth, practice the skills. And the one thing that you can't break is you can't go faster than you are. And everyone will forget that rule and they'll go too fast at the beginning of any race that's cyclocross, something like that.
Yeah, just postpone your concern over strategy right now. Focus on your fitness, build your experience.
And stay smooth. Moving into Alaska's question, did my very first mountain bike race the other day. It was the MTV Vasan in Sweden, 94 kilometers, and did it in 4 hours and 23 minutes. Nice job. As a roadie, I was certainly not used to the dirty clothes when I got home. The conditions I rode in were rainy and muddy, so plenty of sand came home with me. So to my question, do you have any tips on how to clean my kit after a ride? I live in an apartment, so I have limited options, and filling the shower drains with sand is not one of them. So that's from Alaska. So I tossed this one in. It's not usually it doesn't usually. This isn't a typical question for us, but I think all of us have probably had races where we get either a road, mountain, anything like this, where we have absolutely disgusting kits completely covered in mud and road grime and everything else. What things have you guys done to clean the kits? And I guess we'll get into general rules of thumb with cleaning kits.
Yeah. So if you have a washing machine,
yes,
put it in the washing machine.
That's it.
So Jonathan and I, we all talked about this.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I don't want to make you sound bad. Just say what you do.
Yeah,
He takes very good care of his clothes.
It's true. I hand wash all of my kits, but I always thought like, man, I don't want to throw my muddy kit into the washing machine. I might clog things up, right? Getting a bunch of mud and sand in there.
And maybe some can.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've been doing it for years. My son, I have a 5-year-old son. How many times do they come in like totally muddy? We just put it right in the washer, and it's always great.
Yeah.
So I was kind of thinking of the logic. It's like, I have muddy clothes, and I always wash them before I put them in the washer, and they come out clean. Therefore, I have to wash them before I put them in.
Yeah.
You haven't tested the other side.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So, Alaska, if you have a washing machine, just put them in.
Assuming you have one.
Yeah, assuming you have one. And there's apartment washing machines. And
Yeah. Assuming you
Those
don't.
are the ones you can really abuse, too.
Yeah.
well, we know. I mean, there's like little
Good
ones that
point,
you can
Chad.
put. Those little ones you can put, Chad, inside your own apartment.
Yeah.
They're like little small
Stackable
ones.
guys.
Yeah, we actually have some here.
Yeah, we do. So let's say you don't have one. Have you ever cleaned the kit before you come home?
I put them in a bag and put them in a washing machine later.
Yeah, I've cleaned my kit. Yeah. I've taken bottles, clean ones. I don't have mix in there anymore.
Sure.
But I've taken bottles and filled those up with water, and then I just press it right against the fabric and squirt, and it gets a lot of the mud off.
A little pre-treat.
Yeah, it just gets it off, so then I don't have a bunch of mud that could get in the car, even though I put it in a bag, something like that.
Yeah, I did. I don't remember what we were prepping for, but it was hugely muddy, and I made the mistake of getting in my car, and there are little tiny indentations in the fabric, and there's still mud in those bad boys. So
yeah, I think that
lesson
was
learned.
Segundo. I think that was the muddy day. Yeah,
sounds right.
If you live in an area of the United States like Georgia and you have red clay, I'm sure that they have a lot of stuff that they go through because it just stains and ruins everything, right? So you really have to get through. Another thing, if you have a cooler, take your cooler, throw out all the drinks or anything else in there. But take that cooler, and then if you still have water in it or fill it up with water, throw your kits in there. I've seen people do that, then they just drain the cooler out after that.
Makeshift washing machine.
Exactly right. Some things, I guess with the rule of thumb, you never want to put your kits in the dryer, right, Nate? You're on board with that?
Ever.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, well, so what?
Ever.
Okay, so
Let's
here's
cover
what
what happens if you do.
You get it's like Lycra and kits, right? So this is maybe there's some top kits that don't have Lycra, but for your bibs, it gets Lycra in there, and triathletes, especially looking at you, it gets to be eaten out and it gets to be see-through. But a lot of times if it's black, it doesn't get see-through until it's wet. So when you're in a pace line, and usually by the seam, there's a seam right down the middle. So as you start to sweat, it gets to be see-through for other people.
Oh, it's very unpleasant.
It's a tough view to tolerate.
Actually, if you're a triathlete, don't wear your jammers or like your triathlete shorts in the pool, because also the chlorine will eat through that. They're not made
totally
for like regular swimming. You can buy like jammers that are swimming specific that are made of a different material, but don't wear your tri shorts.
Yes.
People think I got to do, it's race day equipment. Yeah. Just don't do that, because those also, you get in the pool and everything gets see-through.
Yes.
It's like a white t-shirt, but it's
not
black.
a good thing.
It's not a good thing.
And it's not pleasant to ride, like you said. You don't care because you're the person wearing it and you don't have to see it probably.
Yeah, it's not the wheel you want.
Think of the people behind you. It's just nice to cover all of that.
Yeah, just let it air dry.
Yeah, just let it air dry. Your kits are going to last longer. They're going to fit better, because otherwise when you throw it in the dryer, everything constricts at different rates and all that stuff.
Dryer doesn't do good things to performance fabrics.
There are care instructions on these things. Just follow those.
And they say do not dry in almost every case.
Don't iron.
Yes, don't iron your kids.
Put a crease down the middle of the bibs. Nice and sharp.
Got to make sure they're real sharp creases. Yeah. Another thing I've seen a lot of people use like OxyClean. And that may work well on some stuff, but it can be pretty harsh on kits, like those sort of things. And I know that there are like sports specific detergents that some people recommend using. Yeah. I use normal detergent and my stuff is fine. I've never had any issues with using normal detergent and it ruining my kits.
Me either, or having bad smell with normal detergent.
Yeah.
There's all those ones that are like sport. I'm like, well, it's the same thing as the other one. I've never had a problem with regular detergent. So why do I need to buy a more expensive sport detergent?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let us know if you're listening to this. Let us go to forum.trainerroad.com and let us know what tips you have for people to clean their kits before they travel home. Or if you live in an area where like kits stain really easily because of the mud, let us know what you do. Do you put some sort of treatment on your kits beforehand so mud doesn't stick to it? I'd be interested to hear.
One more thing. There's a Kickstarter for this little washing machine. It's like, I don't know, very small, a small box, and it's a foot-powered washing machine. You put all your stuff in there and you do your foot, and it like washes your clothes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's for like rural stuff.
Sure.
Without,
for sure.
Or places that don't have any infrastructure.
Dishwasher equivalents like that. Pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's
pretty.
I know that's too. I'm not going to do that at races.
You're not going to bring that with you.
Bring my washing machine out, put it all in.
If anyone would do it, actually, it'd probably be you.
Yeah, it'd probably be me. Yeah, I won't do that.
You'd have
I
a
promise.
3-bin system. Put them all through.
Lisa's question. She says, "Hey guys, love the podcast and dynamic. I've quickly become a fan. So much great information. Thanks for listening, Lisa. Appreciate it." She says, "I'm a 41-year-old female. I'm 5 foot 5 inches and 49 kilograms. Nate's actually going to run through right now on 5 foot 5 inches. Actually, we're going to get it later, so don't worry about it if you use metric. We're going to get to all these things in metric for you. But so she weighs about 108 pounds. I've just started road riding less than 2 years ago and training 7 months ago. Now that the kids can watch themselves, that's got to be liberating, right? She's got that. Now it's time for her. It's great. My FTP has gone from 113 to 160, 42% in this time. That's great.
That's awesome at 49 kilograms. That's really
Heck
good.
yeah, in 7 months. So she says, my question is relating to time trials, particularly on flats and in wind. I've heard that aerodynamic drag is the more important factor on flats and downhills than power to weight. Does this mean that all hope is lost for me? How can I ever be as fast at time trialing if I can't put out raw power like the larger riders? And she says, I currently use a regular road bike for time trials. Sincerely yours in type A determination, Lisa from Canada.
Okay, Lisa, this is a really good question.
Yes.
Right?
Nice.
So you could probably just go to Best Bike Split and figure some of this out, but we're going to talk about general principles. Okay, so you are, what was it, 5'5"? That's going to be 165 centimeters, and you weigh 49 kilograms, which is 108 pounds. So the weight's not going to, the weight usually doesn't matter very much in aerodynamics. So you at a good way to put it is you at like 10 pounds heavier or 10 pounds less isn't going to dramatically change your aerodynamic drag.
Right.
But if you were 6 inches taller, that usually does have a correlation of like the taller you are, the less aero you are.
Yeah, it just makes sense, right? You occupy more space.
Yep. And we went to the velodrome and did aero testing. We have our CDA numbers, which is your aerodynamic drag.
Yep.
And
we should say it's assumed in this context of that test. It's not like we measured it in a wind tunnel or something like that. So.
Yep. We use a power meter, go around a velodrome. They time it and kind of measure it that way. So what we did is we looked at a website. It's cyclingpowerlab.com/cycling aerodynamics. And producer Tucker, can you put all of this data in the forum post?
Yeah, we have
because
a
it's
ton
kind
of
of
it.
a lot. But anyways, what we did is you can put in your height and weight, and it will assume what your aerodynamic drag is. So we did it for all three of us, and for all three of us, it was 0.02 higher. So about 20 watts higher than our measured aerodynamic drag. When I say 0.02, every 0.01 is 10 grams. Or 0.01 is 10 watts.
10 watts, yeah.
Yep. So 0.02 is 20 watts. So what we think, it was interesting because it was proportionally the same for us.
For all three of us.
It carried nicely.
Even though we all have different CDAs, it was all off by the same amount. Yeah.
And we also, going to that tunnel, we had some fancy bikes.
Yeah,
and
which says it's probably pretty close considering the equipment most people are going to bring to the race start.
Because we have an optimized skin suits, helmets, gloves, shoe covers.
We were lacking
a
in no
bike.
way.
We had everything sorted in terms of equipment, whereas most people probably don't.
You guys are killing my flow.
Sorry.
Okay.
Continue, Nate.
Sorry, I know how important that is.
So we had this recorded. You can see how many times I interrupt you. Never. What's the CDA? So what is the? I'm all in my flow. So, anyways, what we did for you is we said, okay, if you were optimized for aero, we subtracted the same 0.02 from you, and we got a CDA from you, which is 0.1964, which is low. That's lower than Jonathan's, but because you are 5'5" and 108 pounds, you're going to be small, right? And then what we did then is we did your power to aerodynamic drag ratio. And that's what makes you fast on a slow course. There's some the only other difference will be like rolling resistance, but it's going to be small. You're going to have less rolling resistance than like Chad and I because we're heavier, but we won't worry about that right now. So looking at those numbers, you score a 907. And that probably means nothing to you without context. But for the three of us, Chad would be 1197, it's about 1200. Jonathan would be 1250, and I'm like a 1312. And these are with FTPs that we think we could hold
right now.
Right now.
Yeah. on a
TT bike.
On a TT bike. So like for me, that'd be 315 because I did 330 for like 20 minutes before. So I just like 315 for an hour. So anyways, what your difference is, like you're the same proportionally different between me and Chad as you and Chad, Lisa. So I think you could actually be pretty fast if you can get small. And especially for women, I would think you're probably like, I think you're good, Lisa.
Yeah,
I've been beaten pretty handily by guys putting out much less watts, but much smaller in stature. So it does translate. You may think to be a good TT, or you just have to have this massive FTP regardless of your size. No,
right?
You can get aero and you can get your power to a reasonable height, and you've got yours up there a ways too. So I think you stand a good chance of being a good TTer. Yeah,
the only thing where it might get difficult is on like really windy days, and the way that you should look at like wind is, in one respect, you'll cut through the wind easier than other riders, which is really good. But a bigger rider that has like a bigger threshold, let's say that they have a 15-mile-an-hour headwind coming at them, that's just going to have less of a relative impact on their ability to, generate and create speed compared to you, since you'll have a lower threshold, right? So it just kind of drags out a bit more.
Light bulb went on.
So
No, I just thought about something interesting we did before I just went on this last trip. We did a TT, and I did it on my road bike.
Yes. Oh yeah, we didn't talk about this.
We didn't talk about this.
It's pretty interesting. So you had the Cervelo P3. P5. Yes, P5. And you didn't have the one with a big fork or anything like that. You had the UCI legal setup on that one. So that was your TT bike, but we've covered this before, I think. But you're 6'6".
I'll just give the overall kind of the thing about this. So on my TT bike, the problem with that is my position. I'm awkward. My morphology is weird.
Yes.
Right. I'm not normal. And for the UCI position, I'm getting this like tight position. It's all weird, and I got to get the saddle super high and super forward, like 99 centimeters.
It's really high.
Crazy high. Which also puts my head higher, right? And then I have to have all this stack.
And puts your hips higher?
Yeah, everything, right? So I did this TT course before, and pretty similar conditions day. That's the one thing we don't know about. But I did this in training with all aero gear, and I did 300 watts. This was like, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And I scored, I don't know, it was like 18 minutes. And then I did this on a road bike on another, it was not a good conditions day, pretty much the same one.
Yep.
On the road bike, though, my saddle position is much lower, and I was in the drops with my Venge. Still all the aero gear I'd wear, aero helmet with NV 7/8s, where I had a disc on the other one, and same tires. And I did 300 watts, and
you were faster, weren't you?
No, I was exactly the same speed, almost to the second.
It's crazy.
And which makes me think...
On a tougher day, too, conditions-wise.
Probably the same.
I think it was slower.
We don't know. That's the one thing. So you could never know that, right? But what the takeaway is that these two things are close enough that I have aero to gain on my road bike by just putting on clip-on aero bars.
Yeah, for sure.
Compared to my TT bike because I'm so much higher.
Yeah.
So what I think I'm going to do is have the classic laid-back position on probably on the TT bike still, just because it's easier to get aero bars with the correct length and stuff than on a Venge with aero bars.
Yep.
And try to have basically mimic my road position, and instead of having my arms in the drops, just have my arms over the handlebars.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Also for people, Lisa, you're on a road bike with aero bars. This is funny. Everyone knows this, but nobody cares. The difference between a road bike and a TT bike, very few watts.
It's really the position that you have on it. And Cycling Weekly actually did a recent video on this that I thought was really good with a gal, I think a pro cyclist. And she went into the wind tunnel and she rode her standard setup, and then they stepped through and they did, okay, now we're going to just put aero bars on and test that. And then they did a full TT test. And they basically showed that at like higher speeds, once she picked her speed up, then yes, the TT bike was more efficient. But at the speeds that she was probably going to be doing some most time trials at, that would be 40K or longer, it wasn't a wash, but it was really close to it between the two.
The most expensive things offer the least benefit.
In many cases.
We've talked about this. Just buy a really tight kit. If you're going to buy a kit, that's like the biggest one. Aero helmet, tires, shoe covers. Like you're going to buy tires anyways, get the fast tires.
Yeah.
Shoe covers, very cheap. And shave your legs. Lisa's shaving her legs.
Two things I want to add really quick to what you were saying, because I can see people jumping in and pointing things out. So number one, when you say that your saddle is higher on the TT bike than it is on your road bike, the reason for that is because you're shifting it forward as well. Because it's not like you're changing the actual relative height a whole lot between the two.
No, it's a lot. And you know why? Because I've struggled with the same thing. Yes, it is because, this is what I think about watching the videos and stuff, is that when so you're up and forward, but you would think that the distance between the bottom bracket and the same position on the saddle would be the same distance, right, in either spot?
Yeah.
But when I am turned forward and I am so bent over, my hips actually turn down, and
so it allows more.
Yeah, it allows more because my hips are turned down farther through the saddle than when I'm flat. They're kind of like angled
Makes
flat.
sense. Your pelvis is changing angle.
Exactly. And that's the difference. And I'm so tall that it's a longer lever that goes.
And that's the other point that I was going to make about this, is the fact that it's not like you can just move things around to get it into the right position. You almost always have to compromise because of the fact that you're so tall, you have long arms. It's not like you can just, like for Chad and I, we can basically say, just hit X and Y.
This is the best position for me.
And we can hit it.
It's probably UCI legal. UCI doesn't want you to be fast on a TT bike. That's clear.
Yeah, Nate's being discriminated against for sure.
And on top of that, it's downright dangerous.
It genuinely is.
Yeah, so this is something to tell other people. If you've been like me for years struggling with that position, do it on the road bike. And I didn't put out, the fun part about this is I didn't put out much power on the road bike because we had like 4 big days, and we just went to, we did Lee all day. It was, I think, 17 minutes. And recently I've done 360 for like 17 minutes.
Yeah.
So I did 300, pretty tired.
Yeah.
But
still went fast.
Exactly. I want to do more TTs now, right?
Yeah,
it's exciting.
Sure.
So if you get that lock where you're like, oh, I can go fast and I feel good, it's very motivating.
It's the same with optimizing on the TT bike. My district time last year when we did our TT challenge was same time as when I had to put out probably 50, 60 more watts over the course of that 50-ish, 54 minutes.
You really optimized. It was your position
so that's
was
pretty
great.
motivating.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you could have the 2 Chads on the same day. You'd be sub 50.
Yeah. That's the Chad goal. So I'm going to recap some of this. And this is really important because this is basically a good way to find your limiters for time trialing. For example, a lot of people just assume they have a natural limiter, right? Because they're small. Yeah. But in this case, you might not. And a good way to do it is, like Nate said, you can go to that website, cyclingpowerlab.com/cyclingaerodynamics, and you can figure out roughly what your predicted CDA would be. And then you can divide your power by your CDA and then have a relative ratio that you could see where, hey, maybe it's actually not that bad.
Yeah, Lisa, take a look at Amber Neben, because she's, I don't know how many national world championships she's won, and she's not big at all, even by women's standards. She's pretty petite.
And then if you can, do something like a velodrome test with ERO, or go through the process of getting your CDA in one form or another, then you'll be able to see like, okay, well, I'm actually small, but I'm just kind of like a barn door with my flappy jersey, something like that, right? So you'll want to kind of figure these things out. But the one thing I can say for sure on the training side of time trialing, a lot of people think they're terrible time trialists, but honestly, it's just because they haven't really trained to do the sustained sort of work. At least that's how I was. And I know a lot of people are in that boat. When you train, and I know this sounds ridiculously logical, but when you train for a specific thing, you get good at that specific thing.
And in the position.
Even if you think you're bad.
Just so, Chad, in your workout text, you're like, get in the drops this interval.
Yeah.
And I start. And I'm like, never mind, Chad. This isn't going to happen. And I know, I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, I'm going to do this in the future more often. And I never do.
Because in a race, you're in the drops.
The whole time.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing.
The power's not there. You're sore in weird places afterward.
Oh yeah, I mean triathletes can speak to this, right?
There's a
Like
method to my madness. Yeah.
they're spending, full distance athletes are spending 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours on the bike, right?
Yeah.
They better know that position really well.
I'm pretty sure they do. I sure hope so.
Speaking of Kona, really quick on triathletes and this whole time trialing sort of stuff. If you are going to Kona as a racer, first of all, congratulations and you're amazing. Secondly, send me an email. Go to just jonathan@trainerroad.com. Send me an email because we've got a lot of people already sending in emails, which is great, but keep doing it because we want to know who all of you are. So then we can have some fun interviews the week that we are at Kona. We'll have you over to our house, and I may even have another.
Squeeze you in with a
with a lot of folks.
Or...
I may even have a charcuterie board again for you. We'll see. But it's a good time, and it's so cool because we get to learn from your perspective and how you prepare for this event. And I don't care if you're a triathlete or not. We have so much to learn from this whole process. So send those emails. Jacob's question, he says, how do I follow Trainer Road training plans completely without a turbo trainer? We really kind of would have said it's not possible before, but now it is, which is exciting because of outside workouts.
Thanks for the softball, Jacob.
Yeah, there we are. Question done. Moving on. Just joking. It says, I've been using the Trainer Road training plans on my indoor trainer for 1.5 years with great results. Unfortunately, I am without a trainer for the next year or so. So I've bought a cheap-ish cross bike with a power meter and plan to do the sweet spot base plans in outdoor mode. He says, and the way that you do that is just you can actually, when you add a training plan on, you can specify which days you want to train outside. And then you can always just go into the calendar and click on your workout and change it on the fly from inside to outside. Then it just pushes to your Garmin head unit, Wahoo's coming soon, which is exciting. So he says, but how am I going to find my FTP if I'm just training outside? My goal is to compete in several XCO and XCM races, cross-country, Olympic, and marathon, during the summer, but I plan to do some of my everyday races on the roads in the morning before work. I live in a very flat area in Denmark, and he says, is the 8-minute test the best way to perform the FTP test outside, or would I be better off analyzing my race data to just find my FTP? Or should I just skip testing and do a linear progression, for instance, 2% every month? Great question.
It is great. With as an XCO, XCM racer, though, I'm not sure race data is going to get him where he needs to be.
Yeah, I would never pull.
It's going to be difficult.
If it was cross-country marathon and you had like extremely smooth
Long
fire
climbs,
roads that were really long, that's one thing. But I would never trust a metric that you would pull just from. It is interesting, perhaps, to see in post that it may correlate pretty closely. But that doesn't mean just because it correlates closely in post doesn't mean that that's something that you should use to structure your training moving forward.
You might have some efforts that are representative of it, but that's a pretty tough get.
Yep.
What we're saying is it's probably going to be low. Your normalized power is probably going to be low in those type of races compared to what you could do
because of coasting and everything else, or maybe a weird course and your normalized power may be really high, right, and maybe above what you would want to.
Power, yep.
Not a good training benchmark for you. So Nate, what would you say if we're talking about a testing format? Which would you use?
Well, that's Mr.
Chad.
Chad.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Well, first off, don't do the ramp test.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway.
It's just and I guess the reasoning why though, it's just tough to be able to step up systematically.
Yeah.
Every minute, like you need to be able to step up.
That's
keep
an
it on
indoor
track.
assessment protocol right there.
Yeah,
So
it's just too tough.
don't. And then 20/8, it really depends on the terrain you have. I mean, if you have a long, steady climb, I'd say go for the 20. Honestly, you as a XCO and XCM racer, either one of those are going to be pretty suitable. Again, it's about the terrain. The 8-minute I like because it's a little easier to find. Even if you do have a long hill, just the possibility of interruptions over the course of a full 20-minute effort is going to be kind of a big ask, but could happen, but either one of the 20 or 8 would work, honestly.
I can't think of a 20-minute stretch of road that we have a lot of big flat roads and we have a lot of big mountain climbs here, and I can't think of a 20-minute stretch of road that I feel would be consistent enough for that.
Yeah, and
that wouldn't allow for some sort of interruption.
That's not a climb.
That's not, Well, even then, on
even
a climb,
the climbs get interrupted with flat
you have
stretches.
weird undulations, and it makes it difficult to be able to hang on, to whatever power you're trying to hold. So yeah, it's tough. I would go for the 8.
Yep.
It's going to be a good way to go.
Our protocol is a 2x8, so you have to do the 8s, and the comparison between them is kind of useful, but it's not necessary. So really all you need is a solid 8-minute effort. If you do happen to go a couple times and you can look at the comparison between those 2 8-minute efforts, if they're vastly different, then one of them probably had a bit more of an anaerobic contribution than it ought to. And that could influence the estimate a little bit, but that's also why we reduce it by a greater factor than the 20-minute test to kind of compensate for that. So a solid 8-minute effort, a solid 8-minute effort, or a solid 20-minute effort, and then we reduce the 20 by 5%, we reduce the 8 by 10%. It puts us in a pretty small ballpark. And
now, assuming that's the direction you want to go, you could also just bump it up linearly, right? I mean, you could just say, if you're really, and the one thing I would say though is you should be familiar with how your body responds to training, how it feels, that sort of stuff. So then you can step up and know that you're not pushing yourself too much.
2% every month. If you're a high level athlete, that is a lot.
That's a ton.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to get 2% every month.
Right. So right now I'm like
amazing.
5% a year. I'm like, I'd be for the next 3 years, if I could get 5% a year, I would be super happy.
Oh yeah.
Super happy. So 2% a month depends on where you're at. Could be a ton.
Yes.
Could be. Maybe 2 watts a month. I'd be happy with that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So really a lot of that depends on how well you know your body. Speaking of the training app too, we now have, so we're going through a whole process and adding a lot of different, updates and features to the app. Recently, we've added, and we talked about this last week, but once again, it's really cool, native Windows Bluetooth, which basically means you don't need a dongle anymore for most machines.
It's for Windows 10 machines that have applied Windows Update in the last 2 years.
Yep.
And if you haven't, you are helping people in Russia or something sell a lot of stuff. So you should update your Windows.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You don't need any sort of dongle for that, which is pretty awesome. Some other updates too, right, Nate?
Yep. So we talked about multilingual. So the desktop app is now multilingual. We just finished workout goals and descriptions, and we are currently, for Sweet Spot Base, we are currently doing the workout text. So you're gonna have the workout text in Mandarin, Japanese, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, a whole bunch of other ones.
Yeah.
And then also the count. So the desktop app, the calendar does not look like the website. It's like a list, but there is a grid. So like a normal calendar you would see, that is in beta of the desktop app. Ooh. And that's going to be an option to switch between the two. We're going to default you to the grid so it looks just like the website. And so that's going to be in production in about a week or two.
Yep. And if you want access to the beta side of things, you can go to trainerroad.com/download and look for the beta link, and you can go through there. So then you can get access there. Anthony's question, he says, in a recent forum post, it mentioned to ensure that your stores, and he's talking about glycogen stores, are absolutely topped off. You should be, or in order to do that, you should be carb loading 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight for the 2 days before an event. We should probably add some context and clarification on that. So really it's 8 to 10, I think is what is recommended.
Yeah. So I'm going off what I've read a few studies on this and what Matt Fitzgerald said in his book. 8 to 10, more than 10 did not show increase in performance after that.
Right.
There is probably, we read reports of Grand Tour riders going all the way up to 14. And I would think that the people in the study are not doing the same amount of work as someone as a Grand Tour rider.
Probably not.
Probably not.
It's the peak end of human demand almost,
It's the extreme.
Yeah.
I believe this 8 to 10 too. If you're doing 2 hours or more work a day of some intensity, that's kind of the upper limit.
Yeah. So just because we've talked about it plenty of times, but on Cycling Tips, they had that article that was following Mitchelton
Scott.
Right. I almost called them, I think, the name from 3 years prior.
Oregon Green.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what I always default to.
So they were looking at what they were taking in a ton. But once again, that's Grand Tour. And last time I haven't ridden a Grand Tour. I don't think you guys have.
Nope.
Yeah. Chances are the majority of people listening to this haven't done a Grand Tour recently, but you never know. So.
I'm going to do Cape Epic, and that's going to be the caloric expenditure per day is going to be close to a Grand Tour rider each day.
For 7 days.
Yeah, the first day is like a prologue, but then 7 days of 5.5 hours of mountain biking.
You're going to eat so much.
Oh,
I just pictured the semi truck pulling up with Nate's food. Oh man, it'd be a lot of food.
I know. I'm trying to plan logistics because it's going to be hard.
Just get it just for the food.
Just the food.
If anyone is in the Army and does logistics for feeding companies,
can we do a parachute pallet drop? That would be hilarious. Okay, so let's get into this. He says, my question is at 83 kilograms, and he says he's 6'5". That's a kilo of carbs per day. So what go-to meals, snacks, or drinks do you all lean towards during a carb load to make that goal achievable and not have deleterious digestive effects on race day?
Okay, let's just talk about that too.
Let's cover that first, yeah.
Because I have evolved on this opinion. Before I was the same way, and everyone's like, hey, you don't want too much fiber the day before. But I am now the opposite. Like if I eat fiber every day and a ton of fiber in the morning, I go to the bathroom every morning at the same time. And I have coffee and it happens.
Yeah.
But if I have a day where I have low fiber, it doesn't happen in the morning. And then you don't get your pre-race day.
Disrupts your regularity.
You have to, exactly right.
And then it's like, and then on race day, that's bad.
You're carting around extra weight.
And something can happen during the race, especially if you're a runner or triathlete. So I don't know. I say eat lots of fiber all the time, and if you can get regular, just be regular.
Regularity has a huge value, and it's something that we never really talk about with racing, just because it's not usually a very pleasant topic. But the fact is, it has to be a part of your routine that you have nailed down, because otherwise, especially for like triathlon, for Ironman, anything like that, when you're talking a long day.
I agree. It's the common recommendation to avoid fiber pre-event, but this is a strong case why you wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly on the ride, for sure.
Oh, yeah, on the ride.
During the event, yeah.
Yeah, and race day morning.
Yeah.
So that's why we do cream of wheat.
Immediate
cream of wheat.
Yeah, like no fiber in that. Immediate prior, no fiber. But everything else, like the night before, the day before. A couple days before.
So can we cover that one before we carry on, or do you want to carry answer the next one and kind of answer it all together?
About what kind of foods?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's cover that, because you have a whole thing down.
Each their own questions.
Yeah, and it's two different situations. There is.
So these are the foods that we would recommend in this case.
Yeah, and there's like carb loading the day before, and then there's just, and we're going to talk about it, just normal eating carbs if you want to have a high carb diet for cycling.
Yeah.
And there's this thing called life that like you can't
Tell me about it.
And cancer and longevity and antioxidants and fiber in your diet and all this sort of stuff. And so for day to day, we get asked this question like, what do you kind of eat? When you carb load, you can do the same foods but more, and I think that's probably healthier. But man, you guys saw me do it in Leadville. It's painful.
Yes,
it's its own event.
Yes, it is.
So recently, what I've done is really like cereal. I find cereal is super high carb and pretty easy to eat the day before.
It's probably not something you want to just take down a ton of every day, but at the same time, for the race, it's okay.
And that augments when I'm going to talk to you about other like sample meals.
Yeah.
So cereal, and that's also very easy to bring to a race. And I'm not talking about the Ezekiel and the muesli. Those all have their places, but I'm talking like honey bunches of oats or something like that. That's kind of more simple, easier. You can
lower fiber.
Yeah. That's why I still think you want to bring some of the other stuff in to get fiber. And then juice is another one. I usually don't drink any juice, but man, recently it's a lot easier. That's why people too get obese when drinking juice. It's a lot easier to get 200 calories of juice in. Or 200 carbs of juice than to get 200 of that of oatmeal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it takes a lot.
So for sample meals, people have asked, and they say, Nate, your high carb diet's going to kill you. Right? How can you do that? So I'm going to give some examples, and we put this all on the forum and put together some kind of sample meals for like lunches that you can have. And these are lunches.
Yeah, just search for episode 218 and you'll find it.
Yes. And you guys see me eat these lunches. This is almost every day, unless I go out somewhere. So you can get a whole wheat bagel, brown mustard, turkey breast, and then this other stuff, just how you like it, spinach, tomato, and sprouts. You toast the bagel. It's a really good sandwich.
It's delicious.
That's 53 carbs, just under 400 calories. Okay. Aunt Annie's lentil vegetable soup. Pretty much all the Aunt Annie's ones, you can look at them. They're really good. The ingredients are just pretty much vegetables and some olive oil and some salt. You can get 50 grams of carbs from a can of that and 320 calories. I do a sweet potato and black bean mix, like a half a can of black beans and a really large sweet potato. That's 430 calories, 90 grams of carbs.
That's tasty too.
Yeah, right? And inside of that too, you can add different sauces.
Or like pico de gallo or hot sauce, something like that.
Chad and I first had this by that cross race we talked about in Vegas. This is how I came up with it. And it had like a walnut sauce on it. I've tried to make that Never been close.
Yeah, delicious stuff.
This is really good. Yeah.
Even just in a large apple, 34 grams of carbs, 130 calories.
Good amount of fiber in an apple too.
Yep. All of these things have tons of fiber. Hummus. So when you buy hummus, there are different brands of hummus, and the popular brands, you look at it, it's got a lot of has oil added to the garbanzo beans.
Yeah.
But then if you look at other ones, some of them are just garbanzo beans and like paprika and some salt. That's the one you want to buy. So you got to make sure when you buy your hummus that you're not getting soybean oil. Well, if you want soybean oil, you can, but I want the garbanzo beans.
You don't want soybean.
You don't want the Doritos sub-branded hummus, something like that.
Exactly, yeah. And then you can get them spiced and stuff. And
Sure.
Hummus has a ton of fiber too. Like all this food, again, lots of fiber.
Yep.
So I like having a snack of celery and hummus. That's going to be about a cup of celery and half a cup of hummus, 220 calories, 22 grams of carbs. That has more fat, but you do need fat during the day. I've been listing very low-fat stuff. Avocado too. Avocado has an amazing amount of fiber. Like you wouldn't think that like a whole avocado is like 15 grams of fiber. Crazy. So that avocado I put in this thing, you can add that to your sandwich.
The sweet potato.
Sweet potato. You can add it to, you can mix it with your hummus, so that might be weird. Salads. Pretty much you can eat as much salad as you can without dressing. And don't even worry about that.
Yeah.
Also, some of these foods that I'm talking about, the spinach, the celery, some root vegetables are high in nitrate, which is also shown to increase endurance performance. And generally, diets high in nitrate through vegetables, not nitrite, but nitrate, are healthy and can improve heart health.
Yep.
So anyways, I've been saying too many numbers here, but I just want to tell you some. If you put the sandwich and soup and an apple together, that's 136 grams of carbs. So you need 18 or 800 probably of those per day to do the carb loading. So you got to do that 5 times. That's a lot of food. Right? But a sample lunch that I do.
Anything's possible for Nate.
I've got a whole bunch of combos here, but a lunch that I will do is the sandwich, a sweet potato, an apple, and soup. It's hard to eat. It's 1,200 calories, but 226 grams of carbs. That gets you more than a quarter of the way there.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But also, eating this way makes you more full.
It does. You aren't hungry. That's for sure.
I don't have the study linked, but I'm just going to say it anyways. I'll probably get it wrong. Recently, a researcher was trying to figure out if eating processed foods, could you lose the same weight for the same calorie?
Same caloric deficit.
Claims caloric deficit between whole foods and processed foods. And lo and behold, they lost the same amount of weight if you had the same amount of calories. But the people who ate whole foods weren't as hungry. Right?
Yeah.
And that tells everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
So when you eat whole foods, you're not as hungry. Diet's high in fiber. Plus, there's all the other things in this food.
Body's actually getting nourished.
Exactly
right.
And there's all the other things that are small in there that like your, I forget what they're called, phytonutrients, but things like that help reduce cancer risk.
Micronutrients, phytonutrients, antioxidants, all that. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyways, go to forum.trainer.com. You can see all this stuff. But this is an example of how you can eat every day. And it's just high in vegetables, fruit, whole grains, beans.
Yeah, that study
fats.
highlights your entire shift because you used to have that carb cabinet, which just broke my soul every time I opened it.
No, the carb cabinet is still the same.
It's just it's changed. It's evolved.
Everything you just listed is not in that carb cabinet except for cereal.
Yeah.
No, everything is.
It's evolved. The carb cabinet's evolved.
I still have crackers too. I have whole wheat crackers.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do have some simple cereals for those. I take in like a really simple cereal right before I am going to do a workout because I don't want a whole bunch of fiber. So that's what that is for. It's almost like a gel.
I'm going to move into his second question. He says, on a general training day, what level of carb should someone be aiming for? Is there a good recommended default basal rate, which you can then adjust by adding, say, 100 grams per hour of your training to, so you're always adequately fueled up for the next effort? This one is it's an inherently relative question, right? It's going to be different for each person and in terms of what they find.
What type of work you're doing.
And for me, I don't know what my number is in terms of like, I haven't figured that out. Nate, have you figured out basically like you need this many grams of carbs in a typical day to be able to maintain a good training load?
I know that if I don't do it or if I skip a meal, like on these days, a lot of times we don't eat breakfast.
Yeah.
Man, it makes that other workout harder.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Especially if you're doing a lot of work.
Yeah, it's and as long as you can control or do your best to control all the other variables of life, which is obviously we're constantly wrestling with that. But if you can more or less assume that those are the same, and try to keep those consistent for a bit. Honestly, your workout performance, also assuming that your FTP is set properly and everything else, it's a really good barometer of where you're at in terms of fueling adequately or not. And you can kind of get it down, and you could get down to a specific number if you want.
Maybe.
But I don't really know what the number is for me.
And you got to fuel the workout. When we talk about, fuel necessary to accomplish the work ahead, that work ahead could be a day or two down the line too. So which is what Nate's talking about. So when we head into a recovery day and people basically starve themselves all day because they figure I'm not doing any work, they're probably doing that at least some detriment to the subsequent workouts. So what comes the next day, they're going to go into it potentially a little stripped of glycogen, and it could impact the quality of that workout. And if you're doing a lot of work in a week, you do have to be thinking a day or two ahead.
Yeah.
But if you're not, maybe you don't have to do as much.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a sliding scale. And
So if you're like on a low volume plan where you're working out 3 days a week, this changes quite a lot.
Yeah, this was something that I realized when I was staying this year during that during the stage. So actually, I mean, Keegan and Sophia, they've stayed with us a handful of times. They're good friends of ours, and when we look at how they eat, I was like expecting Keegan to basically eat like a bird unless he was training. But on off days, he eats a ton because he knows the next day he's probably, as long as he's training the next day, right? Which in almost every case he is. He's not eating less that day because he's not doing anything that day. He's keeping up that volume of eating because the next day's training is extremely important. Now, the thing is, though, if you're an athlete that's doing this, but then you aren't actually training like you should be training or aren't doing enough, and you think, fueling your workouts, it's a funny thing that we always say here at the office, like when somebody goes and gets like a gigantic burrito and they have a thing of guac and they have chips and they have like 2 things of salsa, and maybe they also get like a torta for later, something like that. We're like, it's just fueling your workouts, right? Yeah, that's what you're doing. So it becomes kind of a joke, but the point is, if you aren't doing the work, there is no reason to put in a ton of fuel. But if you are doing a ton of work and if you have lofty goals, you really got to make sure you have it.
And it's okay. There's composition and there's a total amount of calories.
Yes.
Right. So you can still, in my sample meals, you can have a 600, 700 calorie lunch that is more carb centric, but still less than you would eat on a training day. Or if you're not training for 2 or 3 days, where you're eating, like I said, sweet potato and black beans and some celery and hummus or something. It doesn't have to be low carb. It can still be carbs on that day.
For sure.
And okay, so people are screaming at us right now.
Yes,
and they're probably already typing furiously in the forum about fat adaptation and the amount of carbs. So going back to how many carbs you should eat per day, I think you should play with it and try different things. And just like we said in the with the washing clothes, just because one thing works doesn't mean one thing doesn't work better.
Yeah,
I like to find extremes. I like to find where, okay, that was too much. I don't need that. Or
And
what's
step
the
back
minimum
from
amount
there.
I can eat that makes me still feel great in these workouts.
And we're assuming a carb-based diet here.
Yeah.
Also, we're not talking about fat-adapted athletes or even low-carbohydrate athletes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But there's a lot of people who say, this has been pretty popular in the last couple of years, on this aerobic ride, I'm going to eat less to be able to train myself to burn fat more.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And then
it's common.
that's all fine and good as long as it's not impacting the next day's intensity.
Because you may even be able to hit that workout, like whatever it is, because it may be less demand, but then the next day.
This kind of dovetails into his final question, so let's go there.
Okay.
Yeah, he says, I have a sneaking suspicion that I've been constantly underfueling myself outside of workouts. On a lazy, eat everything in sight cheat day, I might top out around 450 grams of carbs with a sizable portion of that from indulgent fatty snacks, which is honestly really common. Most snacks are high in fat.
And that's when... Sorry.
He says, well, let me finish up. He says, my usual daily diet is probably 300 or less. And he's talking about his grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah, so we're talking about a 50% bump in carbohydrate intake just because he's got cravings.
Yeah.
I want to say 2 things
Because
about
he's
this.
talking about his cheat days here. Yeah.
Exactly. And cheat days I take umbrage with, but we'll just go ahead.
Yeah.
2 things on this. First, he talks about indulgent fatty snacks that have carbs. And carbs don't inherently make you fat for equal caloric intake.
Yeah.
But what I think when people say, if I eat carbs, I'll get fat, because they are thinking of French fries, pizza, it has a lot of fat, Dorito chips, all these things. And when you combine fat and carbs, I mean, it's easier to get a higher caloric intake. And they're usually processed foods. You're not as full, lower fiber. It's easy to to overdo it.
Yep.
I think for Anthony, you should try to do some days of like 500 to 600 grams of carbs with that kind of more of those healthy whole
high
foods.
quality foods.
Yeah, high quality foods, and see how you feel. You might have less overall calories, so you could still lose your body. You could still lose weight. You probably improve your body composition, and you'd be feeling your workouts rather than if you're eating Oreos and Twix and Doritos.
I agree
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cheat days thing, because that's that's a very for cyclists especially. You know, it's like we like to pat ourselves on the back with a cheat day.
Yeah, and I'm fully in favor of cheat days if you need them psychologically to keep you motivated when you're being strict and on the other days. But if you get to a situation where you're relying on that cheat day, or you're hanging in for that cheat day because you know it's going to restock you, that's problematic. First off, if your cheat day is so much in excess of what you're normally eating, that's problematic too. And I kind of wanted to use this mention of his cheat days just to shine a light on what our bodies go through, just one aspect of what our bodies go through when we're heaping workloads onto them. And we talk about cortisol all the time, and it's absolutely, I think, what might be manifesting in Anthony's case here. So we've talked about sympathetic drive. When we work out, we basically go into a sympathetic response.
Yep.
So we're liberating fuel stores and using those fuel stores to fuel work. And part of what liberates those fuel stores is cortisol. So cortisol is to some degree beneficial when it comes to exercise. It's necessary, but the problem is that we exercise a lot. We have stress coming at us from all sides, and sometimes we don't do what is necessary to drop those cortisol levels back down. I mean, just day-to-day stressful living can lead to chronically elevated cortisol levels. Oh yeah. And there's a lot of downside to that, and it's because and there are other factors for sure, but cortisol is a large part of the reason why we have deload weeks, why we have recovery weeks, why we taper, because we have to shed, in particular, cortisol. We have to get those levels down. And high intensity training jacks them up. But high volume training, doesn't matter how you're going about it, whether or not you're doing, you can go do long, slow distance rides, you can go do sweet spot rides. A lot of volume is going to keep your cortisol up, or it's going to put it up. And then what happens afterwards is going to keep it up. And if you're training day after day after day, when does your cortisol come down?
Yeah.
On top of that, the food you eat can also elevate cortisol. So the simpler, more refined sugars can bump cortisol up. Not eating can elevate cortisol. When you get on the ride in the morning and you're going to do that what's the word?
Fat adapter or fasted rides.
Fasted ride. That's cortisol's already up just from waking, and then you're going to jack it up even further by doing some exercise, and you're not going to tamp it down by giving it any carbohydrate, which is what your body needs in order to push those cortisol levels back down. Yeah. So there is an upside, a signaling upside to doing fasted rides, starved rides, and water rides and all that. Sure. There's also an impact. There's a cost to those things, which is why you can't do them frequently.
Yeah. Like everything, I guess, really.
Yeah. So I mean, I know carbohydrate is like seen as the enemy in some contexts when we're trying to ditch fat, but the fact is, there's an other side to that where it's detrimental to avoid those carbohydrates during a ride, especially long rides, especially if you have a high training volume. Oh yeah.
So I guess on the cortisol side of things, what does I guess on this everything according to that everything brings in cortisol, right? So what are the carbohydrate can help within that? Sleep, the sort of things that can drive it back down?
So during long rides, if you're just doing short rides, you can probably deal with an elevated cortisol level over the course of the ride, and it's probably going to fall after the ride, especially if you eat. But longer rides, there comes a point where the cortisol is just up, and it starts to have more deleterious effects than positive ones. So ingesting a bit of carbohydrate is probably a good idea. If you want to do those multi-hour, you have a low-carb dinner, you wake up, you have your black coffee, and you go out and you do a 4 or 5 hour water ride. Yeah. I'm not saying you can't do that, but I am saying that has to be an infrequent occurrence because there are a lot of things that are taking place there that are not desirable. And if you do that too frequently, you're going to start to feel those impacts.
When you did those, how was your recovery the next day?
Terrible, almost always, which is why I could get away with one, knowing I'm going into a recovery day, and then work my way back onto the bike with a moderate ride, and then do my hard intervals the next day. So it affected my recovery cycle too. So the question there is, what did this overall do to performance? Probably didn't give me half the benefit, or maybe much of the benefit at all that I was chasing.
And here's the dangerous part. A lot of the time we assimilate the amount of fatigue that we feel to a job well done or the work accomplished, right?
Yes.
So I found myself when I was doing like fasted rides and doing all that stuff, I'd be going out and I would, be fasted for the first 90 minutes. Then I would just eat like a bird basically for the rest of the 8 hours on a really big day.
Yeah, and you think you're doing something that's...
Then the next day I would feel completely torn apart. I'm like, man, I really pushed myself. That's good. But I wasn't getting any faster. And it's a dangerous thing because we tie that very closely as cyclists with how fatigued and how wrecked we feel basically.
Yeah, and we're just looking
positive.
at performance. What about health? So that's a whole other conversation. And other things that can actually elevate your cortisol levels too and keep them chronically elevated is the amount and quality of your sleep. So if you're shortchanging your sleep, expect to have high cortisol. If you're going to have an all-nighter, expect to have very high cortisol, and it's not going to come down anytime soon. And then on kind of the flip side of that, if you have high cortisol, that's going to affect your sleep too. It's going to make it tougher to get to sleep. It's going to make it tougher to stay asleep.
Vicious cycle.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly that. And then caffeine intake. Caffeine can bump cortisol levels up too. So if you get out of bed, going to do your fasted ride, and you're ingesting coffee or drinking coffee the whole time and bumping the caffeine intake up, it's also going to elevate cortisol. So you have to recognize cortisol's up. I have to do something at some point to bring it back down. I can't do this day in, day out and expect to be recovering the way I need to. There's also an impact on your immune system. So all of this says cortisol needs to be taken seriously. And that's why we taper. That's why we recover. That's why we back it off sometimes. That's why we change the composition of our training so that we're not always doing high intensity training or we're not always doing high volume training, et cetera.
So according to this, I bet a lot of people are like looking around and just going like, I'm getting cortisol from every aspect of my life. But what are signs that it is too high?
Yeah, so there are a ton of signs. And if you go get blood work, there are a ton more signs. So I wanted to just give you a couple to look for because they're easy gets. You can see them right now. And one of them is excess belly or visceral fat. So if you're thick in the middle but kind of lean everywhere else, could be tied to high cortisol levels.
Every dude's like, oh, shoot.
Loss of sex drive. And then in females, dysmenorrhea or amenorrhea. So your periods are fewer and far between or they don't happen at all.
Yeah.
The wakefulness that I just mentioned, weakened immune response, you're getting sick a lot. Those are all things that are tied to it. And those are, like I said, the easy gets. There's a lot of signs and there's a lot of information that's easy to come by if you think you might have chronically elevated levels of cortisol, and most of us do.
I haven't even looked at the comments, but I know someone's said this already. So we have been accused of not covering fat adaptation before.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we've covered it much.
We covered it in
previous
depth.
episodes. But Chad, these things, if you're a fat adapted athlete, does your cortisol level still go through the roof doing fasted rides? Do you know this off the top of your head?
I don't know why it wouldn't. I don't, honestly. I never looked at it from that angle, but I can't think of why it wouldn't. Cortisol is still present.
All right, we can look at that later.
It's still an antagonist of insulin, so there's an interchange between the two. I don't know why. I don't know. I'd have to think on that. Look into it. Yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, next thing. We've talked about this, and I want to have at least my stance on this, which could change because with other evidence, it could change.
Yeah.
And I think you two guys agree with me, and if not, please say it.
Cool.
If you, I think for people who are not fat adapted, that's a whole different. Like you want to be fat adapted and doing 8+ hour races.
Yeah, and let's not confuse that with a low carbohydrate diet because they're not the same thing.
Yeah, that's really common.
They're not the same thing. Low carbohydrate diet as an endurance athlete is hard. Basically, just beating yourself up for no good reason.
Yes, exactly. Yep, great point.
So if you're new to training and you haven't plateaued yet, recommend a high carbohydrate diet, 60 to 70%. You can do 80, but that's really, really hard.
That's extremely hard.
Yep. Still not blowing up calories. It's the percentage, right? To be able to increase. If you've plateaued, but you can add more volume and you have the time and physically you can do it on a high carb diet, please add more volume and your FTP will still start going up. If you are plateaued, you cannot add more volume. Like there's no way that I can change this mix of workouts to get any stronger. That is when you should start to then do these other playing around stuff where I don't have any more time, or maybe you just don't have any more time. I'm going to now start to work on that fat adaptation and work at a higher percentage of fat for these longer rides. Yeah. Because I see people at 2.1 watts per kilo and they're like, oh man, I'm going to be operating at 75 instead of 70% of fat on these aerobic rides, when really you could probably hold longer than your FTP for 4 hours if you train more. Like, you can never get fat adapted that high.
Can I rephrase this?
It's not even fat adaptation you're talking about. You're just talking about aerobic adaptation.
Yeah.
Just getting, it's not fat adaptation. Yeah, you're using fat better, but you're not adapting. When we talk fat adaptation, that leans more towards ketogenic diet and full.
Yes,
full
reliance
committed,
upon.
70%, 80% of my diet's coming from fat.
Let me respond to that before you, because I know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
And there's two ways to do it. When you get people think like, oh, if I eat carbs, any increase in my FTP is all going to be carb dependent, but it's not. Like, you go from, like, for me, 190 watt FTP to say 340. It's not like 190 I was at aerobic pace. Like, at 190 FTP at FTP, I had a very large proportion of glycogen. Yeah, contribution of glycogen being used at 190 watts. Now with my current FTP, 190, like, I did that like over 9 hours, like no problem, right? So that's what we got to think of.
Yeah, and I do have to say, I'm not okay with those percentages. I think a 70-80% carbohydrate diet is way out of balance. So you asked if we disagreed. That's one thing I disagree on.
Yeah, so I'm going to rephrase this. So, because, man, we're deep in the weeds, but I'm going to rephrase this. So basically, athletes, a lot of the time, we start splitting hairs long before we've covered much larger low-hanging fruit that's right in front of us. And in many cases, what we'll do is we'll split hairs and put ourselves at a disadvantage to be able to make those gains on the low-hanging fruit that's in front of us. And nutritionally speaking, like you said, Chad, we just starve ourselves because we're trying to optimize where we're currently at instead of move ourselves to a new position that has much better performance.
It's a tricky balance.
It is tricky. And here's the thing, like, it would be wonderful, and we get this request all the time. People are like, hey, can you guys basically do Trainer Road for nutrition? Like, like, just have everything worked out. And it's just so much more of a variable thing. It's very difficult to be able to prescribe the nutrition at such like a level like that, to be able to just have it laid out in front of you. And it takes experimentation, and also your body changes constantly. And there are plenty of things that can work for you. But the cool part is we can continue to experiment and try to find something that may even work better.
Yeah, and another tricky aspect of this is that you ask yourself, am I under fueling because I don't know. I'm getting through the workouts, but I kind of feel wrecked for the rest of the day. That is an indication of under fueling.
Yep.
I mean, it's okay to be tired after a hard workout. That's absolutely reasonable.
For sure.
But that fatigue has limits, and you need to, and that's this one you kind of got to figure out as you go through the process. You have to figure out how I'm very tired from that workout, but I feel overly tired. Could that be because I'm nutritionally shortchanging myself a bit? Because too many of us get used to operating in a fatigue state all the time because we think we're endurance athletes, so we're always pushing our bodies. So it's appropriate for us to feel this level of fatigue. It's not all the time.
100%. That's a super good point. I'm going to move into Ben's question. Is that cool?
No.
Okay, go ahead, Nick. Let's keep it quick. Let's go into Ben's.
Okay, I would really like to have Trainer Road for nutrition if we could measure the nutrition coming into our bodies. That is so hard to do, especially now.
Yeah.
So it's like the inputs, it's like having a power meter that's just wild all the time.
Yeah.
You don't know. And second, Chad, I think I said 60. So 60 to 70 with some 80. And the 80% is, I'm going off of like Kenyan runners. That's what they do. 80% is like, I don't know how they do it.
Sure.
What is a macro percentage? You have one off the top of your head that you think endurance diets should?
Oh, for endurance? Heavy on the carbs. So I would say 60% of your diet comes from carbohydrate, and then a pretty even split of the remaining 40%.
So I think daily 60% is probably pretty good. But then when you do the carb loading, that's where you got to go to 70, 80, just because your calories will balloon if you're at 60. So just to be
agreed.
For sure.
Yep.
Ben,
we agreed on something for on carbs. That's pretty crazy.
Mark this date.
Yeah.
Ben's question. He says, good morning, gents. 5 stars on everything. Thanks, man. You can leave those reviews on whichever podcast app you're using right now. He says, I'm in the middle of the half try build, low volume. I'm going to rephrase that because I was a little bit dyslexic there. He's doing our half Ironman plan, basically, and he is in the low volume version of it. And he's in the build phase, so halfway, kind of in the middle chunk. He says, and I'm doing that in preparation for the Miami Man 70.3 in November. I've mainly been training for longer stuff, as my last race was a swim around Key West, where I finished 8th overall, 5 hours and 20 minutes.
12-mile swim.
Oh my gosh. That is amazing.
I don't even know.
He said it was super fun.
That's super crazy, right? Yeah, he says it was super fun, and I felt pretty fit from all the tri training. Thanks. I'd say that pretty fit is a very adequate way to describe yourself if that's what you're doing. That's really impressive. He says there's a crit race in 2 weeks I'm racing, but as I haven't been training any of my sprint or really high-end repeatability, do you have any race strategies to try and do well with the arsenal of VO2 and strong threshold that I currently have? I'll be in the Cat 4-5 race, and the course looks like you can pedal all the corners, and it's flat. I've been watching the race analysis videos, which are awesome, by the way. Thanks. You can check those out. We have more ones coming, too. He says, but I'm just not sure about how to apply the tools I have to the race I'll be in. Hopefully, pull an 8 and wait for a break and try to bridge to it. And he says, am I just trying to pound a square peg into a round hole at this point? Which you very well could be, but we'll cover that. He says, I'm mainly just racing to have fun, but also don't want to suck. Yeah, nobody likes to not do well. Thanks in advance for your help. Very respectfully, Ben. So I think that like we've talked about this, strengths and then weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it, you really try to find your limiters. And many times it doesn't necessarily make sense to focus on the weaknesses rather than try to focus on the strengths that you have and exploit those.
That's a good point. Right now, he just has strengths and weaknesses. I'm not sure he has really anything that's definitely going to limit his, especially on a course like this, limit his performance.
Yeah, flat 4-corner crit. I mean, if it was like a punchy, steep, like, a crit like that. Yeah.
And it's still going to be punchy to some extent. Sure. It has to be. It's a mass start race.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got a couple aces.
Yeah, and those aces being sustained power. Like you're and honestly,
he's working on VO.
Yes.
So or VO2 max.
It's kind of funny because a lot of like crit racers, really the last thing they want, and many times, is for a person to just be like solid off the front, because they get into this kind of rhythm where they rely upon the recovery that happens when the field surges, and kind of like, and you can get into a spot where you can surge all day, right? And if you train that, but you really need it to slow down in between those surges, because that's when you can recover.
And I don't know exactly if he's following our plan, I can imagine, but the VO2 max repeats that he's doing, 2 and 3 minute efforts, you get in front of a crit and you go hard for 3 minutes at the start of it, you're going to, it's going to explode.
Oh yeah.
So that right there, and then you've got this big steady state power to sit on after you've gotten just a bit of recovery. Hopefully someone came along with you, or you can fold back into the line a couple riders back.
Oh yeah.
You can do that very same thing again.
Yep.
I mean, you've got a couple of, you're not the ideal criterium racer, but you can definitely do well in crits, especially non-technical ones.
100%. I don't think you just necessarily have to wait for the break too, and then try to bridge to it. I feel like that's kind of like a risky move in a lot of cases.
Especially in a 4-5.
Yeah, because it's just, I mean, you never know. You get such a broad spread, and sometimes you'll have really fast athletes and you may not be able to bring them back, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd say don't wait for the break. Instead,
And he mentioned he's a couple weeks out from this. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Probably a little less by now.
Yep.
But we talked last week, and we talked many times about how quickly you can cultivate a bit of a jump, a bit of elastic power.
Totally. Like you don't just have to, you can be you can work your sprint up really quick.
Really quickly. A couple weeks. I mean, give yourself 3 or 4 workouts, you'll start to see differences in it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Maybe sooner.
Comes back fast.
What if I want to improve my sprint?
Hey, we have a video specifically for that.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, we highlighted your sprinting abilities,
technique.
Pete's sprint abilities.
Yeah.
We looked at the technique, and we found actually some really cool takeaways. And we kind of went into it knowing that we were going to learn. Rather than okay, we want to prove X, Y, and Z, but we actually looked at it back from this perspective of what can we see, the main differences, and learned a ton of stuff. It's really cool.
So I'm not the best sprinter. I can put out 1,200 watts for 5 seconds or something.
Which, for your size and for your threshold and everything else, you'd expect it to be higher, right? Is what you're getting at with that.
No.
Well, for some people though,
the
they would
power's not
love.
bad.
I wasn't gonna. That's what my point is. Everyone's very nice, but a couple trolls are just like they're
nice.
so mean.
Yeah.
People on YouTube, it's okay.
What I'm getting at here is that you say that your sprint, paltry sprint at 1,200, somebody would kill to be able to put out 1,200.
No.
watts,
I beat a ton of people in sprints.
Yeah.
All the way through Cat 3, I beat people in 1, 2, 3 races sprinting, 35 plus. I don't have. It's not horrible. I'm just not a sprinter. There's people who are way better than me.
Sure.
I want to say for Ben, I have some thoughts on this. One, I went into this year racing 4 or 5 races, only doing sweet spot base, which kind of sounds what you're doing.
Yeah.
When I was even less threshold probably than you're at, and you can still do really well. It's in a 4 or 5 race. There's a lot of this is kind of like a trend recently. People saying like, oh, it's not about FTP, it's about these other things. And someone actually gave this example, like, I would rather be like a honed rider at 285 than a raw like 330 FTP rider. And I am totally the opposite.
I disagree with that.
Totally disagree, right?
Yeah, totally.
If you add 20 watts to your FTP, all the other efforts, like your VO2 max efforts are now, I don't know what the math is, but instead of 120, they're like 110.
Yeah,
everything is
it all
easier.
shifts.
Everything is way easier. And what you do is, Jonathan, actually, there's a video coming out soon of you doing this in all our crits, is being smooth. And again, people love to hate on me. In some of the crit videos, they're like, Nate, you're dropping the wheels. And what you do, if you look at the power, there'll be surges and crits, and you have to make the choice. Do you think that this surge is going to like continue and like be
Tail you off?
Or a lot of races, what it does is surges, then comes back, surges and comes back.
And if you follow that every single time, you're just taking stuff out of you're dropping too much gas.
It's just another match. You just
Yep, exactly right.
If you stick it. So if you try to get these like 2 inches and you're accelerating, you stick it. But we saw Jonathan do it. He knew, he's done this course a lot of times. He's going at like, your FTP is what, somewhere in the low 300s?
Yeah, 305, 310.
And you're not going over 400, where other people might go up to like 600 to do it. And you see it takes you like 4 seconds to close the gap, not because of lack of fitness, but because of strategy. So Ben, when you do this, patience and strategy. You see me do this to a land park when I had the same kind of fitness profile. Other races, totally different. You have to like be on it because you're going to get dropped.
Yep, if you're at your limit, you have to.
Yeah, and then do the things we've talked about in the crit videos. Go from the back to the front for accelerations and attacks.
Yep.
But in a 4.5, I've won some of these with breakaways. It's a little bit harder, I think, because there's more chasing that goes on.
Yes.
You really have to, instead of being let go, you have to overpower the field.
Yeah, that's how breakaways happen in the lower categories. Whereas in the higher categories, or I should say faster categories, people like are okay with a break getting out.
It's more strategic.
It's
Because they know they'll bring them back.
Yeah.
It's very different. But the thing is, regardless, all you need is a small gap. And people give up
so often.
Like it doesn't have to be a big one, and all it has to do is if you can stick it out of sight, out of mind, definitely applies. But in a 4-corner crit, that can be kind of tough depending on the layout of the course. But also, if you can be out and you can have a decent gap, and I mean like 15 seconds, but if you have that 15-second gap for like 3 laps, people might become discouraged, and it's crazy. All you need is a small amount.
There are a lot of people who want to hide in 4 or 5 races. People who don't want to work. They just want to sit in and wait for the sprint. That's super common.
Oh yeah, that's like everybody wants to do that. They want to win the sprint finish.
So you
in a
get
4 or
that
5
little bit of a
race.
gap. There aren't too many people who are going to commit to chasing it down.
Yeah, because they think it's going to take the sprint out of them.
Yeah,
Right?
they think
You
it's
do it late. Sorry,
Yeah.
I did interrupt you there. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. It's all right. Go ahead. I was done pretty much.
Okay, good. I did then. Take that away from my tally. If you interrupt, if you do the break, if you have to do the attack late, if you don't do the attack late, I think there was a lot of chasing in my experience.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But if you do it late in the race, especially the last lap,
Yeah.
then it's a little bit different. Here's my pet peeve: is when people give up in the break. Especially at the beginning of the break, when people are close, but there's still a gap. And there's so many...
Just shut her down just a few seconds prior, is that what you mean?
No, I mean, so like you're in the breakaway, and let's say there's only like you're going really hard though. There's like a 3 or 4 bike gap length to the field, and they're strung out and they're coming, and someone like doesn't want to pull through or something like that, where if you pulled through and did a hard pull, this isn't the time for a smooth pull, you go hard, all it takes is one person at the front to get tired, to flip their elbow, and the second person to say, I don't want to do this right now. I'm tired too.
And then you've got a gap.
And then it's gone. And that happens all the time where you think it's back, but it's not back.
Yep.
And you got to go. And this just happened to me recently in a race. Like, the field was too close. I didn't want to pull through. Where if they would have pulled for like 15 seconds, then I could have jammed again, and we would have broken it up.
Yep. Perfect.
So you're saying wait till late in the race to discourage people from going? Wait.
No, 2 different things. So one is if you're in a breakaway, don't give up until it's actually together. Sometimes when it's really close, it doesn't mean that it's together. But also, if you're going to go on a breakaway on the 4.5s, I feel like, in my experience, it gets, unless you just do this huge attack, early stuff gets chased down, but late stuff doesn't get chased down as hard because people are thinking they want to sprint. They look to others.
Just like what Chad was saying.
Yeah. But I also think the early break has a place in a 4-5 race with a strong triathlete.
Yeah, exactly. If you can roll it, if you have the differential, right, in terms of abilities for everybody
even
else.
if you have to solo it
Yep.
I think if you've got the big engine, why not give it a shot?
Yep. Yeah,
Solo's
exactly.
tough.
It's very tough.
Yeah. Good. Ben, are you solo?
Done it
Tell
a few
me.
times.
Alex's
You're
question.
strong, dude.
Let's move into Alex's
Was.
question, and then after that, we're going to roll into some of the live questions you submitted via YouTube. It says, I have a question about what happens after reaching peak fitness whilst racing, or more specifically, how to recover and adjust to an unexpected peak performance. So there's a couple red herrings already that we see in that portion of that question right there. So he says, for some context, after a solid 6-month training block, 6 months is a big training block. Usually a training block is something that they're talking about, a few weeks, something like that. So 6 months of training. I finally convinced myself to buy a race license as I had been riding with friends who had been racing successfully. During the second crit of the 4 I have now raced, I rode away from the field and took over a minute to the line solo after an all-time best 30-minute effort. He says it was 325 normalized watts at around 67 kilograms. That's a very good output. It says, but since this effort, I've been really struggling with planning towards the next block of racing coming up in around 2 to 3 weeks. I'm still feeling pretty blown from this effort in the last race, and 5 days after the fact, I still feel my level of recovery is insufficient to begin building again at around a week after my last race. So do you have any tips regarding how to balance the recovery needed to bounce back from a somewhat surprise all-time effort like this while still being able to build more towards racing? So we can, I guess, go from there. The first thing, I want to pick out something that I see a lot of racers actually talk about, and I don't think there's anything to actually back up what we talk about in this case, racers, when we say this. A lot of the time we think that peaking was like a specific effort that we had in a race, and we peaked and we put out so much power for our bodies that at that point it's all a downhill slide after that.
Yeah,
and
peaks are not so short-lived.
Exactly right. Like a peak in fitness, we're not talking about a 30-minute hard effort.
No, you can stretch a peak a couple of weeks. You can stretch a peak a month.
Yes.
Maybe.
We're talking about your abilities just being elevated to the point where you are. And also, if your peak only lasted 30 minutes, it's not a peak.
No single 30-minute effort is going to be what sets you back in the days and weeks ahead.
100%.
If that's what's going on, then it's all the training that puts you in there. That might be the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yep.
But that's not what caused it.
Yeah, 100%.
When we think about peak, it's high fitness with low fatigue.
Exactly
That's
right.
the peak. So having the low fatigue, and you can
extend that for quite a long length of time if done right.
But if you go too far, your fitness goes down.
Yep.
Exactly
So
right.
that's what we're talking
That's
about.
what we're hearing here. That's what we're seeing here too.
Great way to phrase it, Nate.
Thank you, Jonathan.
You're welcome, Nate. And I think but it's really common. People say like, now there's one thing like, I'm going to use your Leadville race, for example. Big day, a lot of training stress, but also the fact that the nutrition fell apart, the hydration fell apart, everything else. That's something where you can actually go into a hole and it takes a long time to recover from because you put your body in a serious amount of distress. Yeah. If you're at, it's
a whole hard day though. That's not a 30-minute effort.
Exactly right. It's a very different thing. So when you're talking about like recognizing peak fitness, like Nate, you said, and if you follow the plans, it's really easy because it just lays it out for you, right? And it's perfectly planned for you. But it really comes down to the point when your fitness is high and then we've managed to drop off that fatigue. Yeah. So then race time.
Tone down those cortisol levels for one thing.
Hey, yeah, there's another thing with it, right? Yeah. Now, that said, so when you're recognizing peak fitness, so how do you differentiate that between like a really good effort and then peak fitness? You should be able to know when peak fitness arrives because you will have planned for it in almost every case. Like there's going to be a trajectory, you're building toward it, and you can expect to be there. You can still that doesn't mean that you don't have incredible performances earlier on in your training season though. Like you were just saying with sweet spot base racing crits earlier in the year, it wasn't like you had terrible performance, right? Yep. You were still racing really well.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's peak fitness isn't racing fast. It isn't putting out peak power even for a short period of time.
You can peak early. That's possible. I mean, you can peak too early, have done too much work such that your best fitness manifests earlier in the season than you want it to, but that's not an irrecoverable situation to be in.
Yeah.
Then you just know you have to change something and you have to change it quickly so that you get a bit of recovery and then you can ramp back up to potentially a higher peak or maybe the same peak level at the time that you want it.
I assume Alex is just tired, right? In this case.
Yeah, everything about that. That's what that sounds like to me.
Yeah. Yeah, just a lot of fatigue.
6 months, and I don't know what the composition of those 6 months was, and I don't know how much fatigue or how consistent he's been, but let's just assume he's doing it all right. 6 months of training is a long
Yeah, that's a
long
full
block of
season.
training.
Yep, that's what you got to build. I mean, that's a lot.
Alex, like, it's crazy that he did 4.8 watts per kilo for 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's really
That is insane.
really
It's
good.
Yeah. Like, that would be
Fast.
512 watts for me for 30 minutes.
Yep. And that doesn't mean though that you like somehow like blew a bubble, so to speak, right? Like you didn't like reach some sort of peak and then like ruin yourself because you rode really hard. Because once again, going back to the cyclocross question, we can only ride as hard as we can ride. It's not like we can overreach ourselves and then like blow our bodies out in some way or another like that. Yep. You can only do so much. So I guess once you've reached a peak, Chad, coming down on the backside of a peak, how should you handle things? Once you've reached peak fitness, checked off your goals, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you can ride that wave for a little while, which is fun. And we've talked many times about how little effort it takes or little work it takes to maintain fitness as opposed to building it. So why not get some, get your kicks, do some races just because. I mean, not a lot of people do September and October races. They're just not on the calendar. But when you're super fit in July, why not at least plunk some of them on the calendar?
Yeah, for sure. Make hay, right? While the sun shines.
You got it.
Yeah, it's a fun way to do it.
And otherwise, just accept that that's it. It's time to go into a deload. Maybe take a transition period of a couple weeks.
Yeah,
probably not more, depending, and then ramp it back up.
Get right back in.
Yeah.
Let's go into some YouTube questions.
I already have a super important one lined up.
Okay.
Seth asks, how many unbroken push-ups can Chad do?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And then please demonstrate on this table.
No.
We won't be demonstrating.
I've done 60 in 60 seconds, but not recently.
That's impressive.
That's really good.
That's really.
I was impressed with me.
As you should be. Yeah. Wow, 60 in 60 seconds. Maybe we should do some sort of a challenge here and post it in the forum.
I don't want to be part of that challenge. I'll record it.
Yeah. I want to see how many we can do.
Just unbroken, as in
unbroken, as in like no breaks, just
so you
going.
can stay in a plank for 5 minutes to get one more out if you want to. Sort of thing.
I don't know. I don't know.
You're unbroken as in flowing. I gotcha.
Yeah, flowing.
Okay.
Yeah, flowing nonstop. Seeing how many.
How about Pete versus Chad?
Yeah, I mean Pete. That could be interesting.
Versus anybody who isn't me.
You're probably the best in the office
at push-ups.
Possibly.
I bet Brian could probably show me a thing or two.
And the unattached cyclist answered actually already for you. He already answered and he said you can do one more than Chuck Norris. So there we go. Okay, somebody says, am I cheating? And we've gotten this question before, but am I cheating?
Can we address the
quotes?
quality of push-ups really quick just before we move away from that topic?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Because what was it, Trevin?
No, I don't know. But, no, it wasn't. It was Jeff Kabush.
Jeff
he was
Kabush,
doing the, yeah.
Those aren't push-ups, Jeff. I'm sorry. If we do a push-up challenge, we're going to do proper push-ups.
There we go.
Okay, back on track.
Okay. I'll make sure my toddler listens to that. He does push-ups with very poor form. It's terrible. Yeah, I know. Right? Yeah. So this person says, Michael says, am I cheating if I warm up for a ramp test? Many trainer road workouts I warm up at or near the interval max, and the 8 to 20 minute FTP tests had warm-ups. Can I do 2 to 3 minutes at an FTP, recover, and then do the ramp test?
Can I answer this one?
Yeah, but I also have a very applicable anecdote for this. So jump in
so
first.
We have designed this the warm-up is built into it. I think you want to ride more. We have designed the ramp test based off all the data we have to get you into the right training zones for trainer road. So you'd be breaking that a little bit. That being said, if you want to do it, you can do it. Just make sure that it's repeated each time.
Yes.
And then after your ramp test, if you find out that the workouts are like if you're getting a higher result because of this, and then you find out the workouts you can't do them, then know that, okay, every time I do this and I warm up more, I'm going to have to then reduce my FTP from the ramp test this amount. Yep. So just keep it consistent and then know that you might have to tweak a little bit afterwards.
So I swore when we were testing the ramp test, I swore I was like, I need more warm up. This is terrible.
You were very adamant to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so I took that ramp test and I got a number and without the warm up, and I was very upset. And then I did the ramp test with what I deemed an adequate warm up, and I got the same number.
Exact
same. Exact same. So, and I had an adequate rest between the 2 days. It was like a week apart. I didn't have any huge changes in fitness. I think that a lot, and we've talked about this before with warm-ups, a lot of it is psychological. And yes, there are absolutely, physiological things that are happening in our bodies. There, but I think a lot of the time we get mentally attached to a warm-up and we feel that we absolutely need it. And there are a lot of things that go on once we push hard for one point and then we can relax. But I personally can attest, this is an anecdote, so N equals 1, but for me, doing more, even though I thought I wanted it, doing a warm-up before the ramp test doesn't change my results. So,
and the nature of the ramp test, those early, probably 5, 10, 12 minutes are
It's
warm
very
up
easy.
anyways. And I think we start with a 5-minute
Yeah.
roll into
Uh-huh.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's plenty of warm up.
Yep. Yeah, you're getting there. So, and then we tested for all of these things to make sure that we weren't, putting out a bad test protocol that was somehow going to give us bad
Lots
data.
of data, yeah.
Tons of work on that. So, yeah.
Magnus asks, looks like Nate have gotten a stomach. What happened?
Looks like Nate's gotten a stomach.
It's hard being me, man. Maybe I'm like approachable. Everyone likes to talk about. But
that's
okay, so maybe it's a shirt, but I do have some belly fat. But really, what happened? I went on a week vacation, and
Yeah.
I ate chips.
You went
and
on vacation.
I went on vacation, and that does like, I don't know if you guys, but if I do a week of like just eat anything,
Yeah.
I notice a difference in a week.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's why I don't do it.
But I'm like 15% on DEXA right now,
Yeah.
and on a scale, I'm 10 to 9% body fat.
Yeah. So pretty. Yeah, you're lean.
I'm lean, but
Yeah.
anyways.
This one's from Matthew Vanderpool for certain, I'm sure. This one, Chad, I don't know if we can answer this one right off the bat. Yeah, we got him. No worries. He says, "Hello all, and question for Chad. I'm taking a supplement, when taking a supplement as beta-alanine, can we take this all year long, or peaking prior 6 to 8 weeks to the championships or some other big event that I'm preparing for?"
Yeah, I can't even remember what beta-alanine's for.
Let's
Short efforts between 1 to 10 minutes improvement.
Yeah. Let's look
So
at this.
creatine-ish?
Let's look at this next week, actually, because we've gotten a number of questions on this very thing.
Sure.
So we'll answer it next week.
Beta-alanine.
He says he is Matthew from Belgium, so it's absolutely Matthew Vanderpool. He's the only one, actually. So
Sneaky.
there we go. Yeah. Plenty of people are talking about the clothes cleaning thing. Somebody says they get a portable little wash spray machine and bring it to wash down not just their bike, but their kit. So those are like the things that a lot of the time you'll see it for agricultural uses. Where it's like a little pump and you pump it up and then you have a little nozzle where you can spray from it. I've seen that before.
What's a diaper genie? What does that do? Either one of you have a diaper genie?
Yeah, diaper genie's the worst invention ever. So it's
it is.
it's like a trash can that's meant to like seal in the grossness,
Yes.
but it doesn't really seal in the grossness. What you do is if you have a poopy diaper is you go and throw that away right away.
Throw it away instantly.
You don't like leave it in a diaper genie.
Oh, I thought there was.
No.
Okay. So those are for disposable diapers. Then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Very
That's
different.
not what I thought.
Somebody said, "Don't wear white." That's a very good tip. Yes. And then another person says that he actually just gets into the shower with his kit on first, and then he goes.
I do that when I do. So I do a ride and then I hop in the sauna and I sweat like a pig for however long. And then I hop in the shower with the kit still on, wring it out.
Yeah. That's not a bad idea.
Someone says power wash it while spraying off your bike after a muddy race. I've tried this before, but whatever happens is like it flings in the air and then like
That'd be a really funny.
whatever it
floor mat
touches.
clamps.
Yeah, clamp.
I
down.
don't, but whatever it touches, then it like
It
gets
gets
grass
dirty.
all over it or
Yep.
dirt, and it gets dirtier than
Oh,
when
so
it
you
started.
just hold it and,
Yeah.
No, I try to put it somewhere. I don't have a floor mat clamp thing
no,
at my house.
they're at car washes.
Yeah.
I don't go to car washes to wash my kit.
Well, I do, and they have them.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good way to use them.
Yeah.
Magnus says a question for Chad. What do you think about combining your sweet spot plan with CrossFit for an enduro rider? We just hit like so many trigger points for people. Sweet spot, CrossFit.
I think it's a rad
enduro.
combination. That's exactly what Alex and I did back in the day, and we were very good CrossFitters, and we were pretty fast on the bike. So it was a good blend because we were doing low volume 3 days a week on the bike, and then 3 days a week in the CrossFit gym.
That's like a very generalist plan, and I think if you do that, you will look very good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were we were just fit. Period.
Yeah.
Yep.
We could do.
I would say go check out Richie Root on Instagram and see a lot of the work that he does. It's, a ton of functional movements that you'll see that are also utilized in a lot of CrossFit sort of stuff. And Richie puts in a ton of time also on the road bike. He said he puts in a lot of time on the road bike and loves that portion of his training. So does both.
So this would be probably pretty good for an enduro rider. If you are any other type of rider, you probably have, I'm going to almost guarantee that you would be faster by having the volume of CrossFit be replaced with riding. So if you're a road racer or crit rider.
Yeah, I don't think CrossFit figures too well into the context of endurance athletes unless you're a gravity or a cyclocross mountain bike to a lesser extent, but
Really short track stuff.
Yep.
Where it's like
yeah,
sprinting.
Somebody asked Nate, what clip-on aero bars do you use for your Venge?
They have one.
It's like a specific one for it, right?
Yeah. And
but you haven't gotten them yet.
no, I got them, and they just hurt.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kind of disappointing.
They aren't
hurt
very
your,
long.
What do you mean hurt? Your elbows?
I just, it's not a good position. It is a it's the UCI ones, so they're very short. They could be long. Basically, my forearms are too long for where the elbow is. It's like the pad is kind of by my wrist, and then I'm holding on.
Can I try
and
those
then
out?
They won't. Oh yeah, you have a bench. You can have them.
Yeah. There we go.
I'll try them out. I'll try them out. And
Yeah. Somebody says in the most recent World Cup mountain bike cross country race, you can find those on Red Bull TV. And also, congratulations to Stan's Pivot team rider, Keegan Swenson. He was part of the team relay that just raced yesterday. And we got second to Switzerland. It's not on TV. It wasn't televised. I know.
Okay.
Yeah, so don't worry about it. But we got second to Switzerland. And something interesting with that, I think that he took off just ahead of Nino on the last lap. So it was Keegan and then Nino. And Keegan said he felt like he was being hunted like a small rabbit. But an interesting thing, if you go onto his Instagram, you can check it out.
He's coming for me.
You can see Nino try to attack him on a climb, and Keegan attacks, and he can't get around him. So that's got to feel pretty darn cool, right? To be able to hold off Nino Schurter. That dude's an all-time legend, right? But he says during that race, it was mentioned that somebody had an automatic dropper post, meaning that they didn't need to use their body weight to put it down. Do you have any thoughts on this? I've long been interested on the idea for technique. Yeah, it's BMC is doing it, and it's a built-in dropper post, and it has a push-pull system, basically. Like it has an air spring that makes it pop up, but then it has a normal spring that makes it pop up, but then an air spring that sucks it down, I think. I may have that backwards. And you basically push one button to make it go up and one button to go down. I think it's brilliant. It is a lot of complexity, but if you think about it, every time you drop your seat, that's a squat, right? So when
you gotta get up.
Yeah, in a mountain bike cross-country race, you're doing that a lot. So especially that cross-country Olympic when you're doing laps over these technical stuff. So do your race and then think doing 28 less squats. I bet you would have better performance if you didn't have to do 28 squats in that time period. So yeah,
sounds reasonable.
I think it's really cool. The only thing right now is it's proprietary to that bike, and it's like built into the frame and has a bunch of things. So it's not like we're gonna see that anytime very soon from any manufacturer.
We're going to Eurobike next week.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see something, right?
Gustavo has a question. Which sealant do you guys recommend? I'm going to use a pair of GP 5000, hopefully the TLs, on the 70.3 Worlds.
Sealant was the question, sorry?
Yeah, what sealant?
Man, I think Stan's race sealant. That race, like if you're not racing all the time, then it dries out and it clogs valve stems really quickly. But man, for racing, it's like, and that's what sealed the holes at Leadville.
And I don't think it dries out any faster. It just has larger like beads in it.
Yes.
So it will gunk up your valve stem.
Yes. I think that like the ratio of liquid to gunk, whatever it is in there, is there's more gunk. So as a result, that's kind of what happens. That's what I would recommend. I know that the Orange Seal has like a bunch of, I think they have an endurance sealant, and I think that's just supposed to last longer, and their normal one is supposed to be just really good at sealing. But I've just been using their race sealant, and it works great.
Especially for 70.3 Worlds.
Oh yeah,
that's the one to use.
I'm not going to play around,
chance.
right?
Yes.
Like you do not want to have something like that going on. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we'll just do one more question from this, and then we'll basically roll in. And remember, next week will be a special episode. Likely will not be live. There is a slight chance that it would be live, but not. Don't count on it.
It'll be like cell phone.
Exactly, because we'd be dealing with a whole lot of cell service sort of stuff. But there's another question in here, and somebody is basically talking about lower back pain when they ride for a long time. Chad, if a rider came to you and said, "Hey, like I'm just having a problem with my lower back, it gets really tense and fatigued and crampy, hurty on a long rides," what are the things that you would want to point out first?
I'm sorry, just jump in on this one.
Yeah.
This person says they've actually got like a problem with the disc.
Yeah.
And a disc herniation, like that. Talk to your doctor.
Talk to your doctor.
So I just want to say, Jonathan, you're doing it generalized.
Generalizing.
Yeah. So first off, trunk strength and being able to position your pelvis. Maybe even before that, look at your saddle. I mean, if it's a flat saddle versus a sloped saddle versus whatever shape of saddle, if it's not supporting your pelvic posture, then that's a lot of strain on your lumbar spine and the muscles that support it.
Or if your pelvic posture has changed maybe since your last saddle choice, right? Because then it might not be the right saddle anymore. It could be a thing.
Yeah. Like I've said before, I just think that any saddle could work for anybody. You just have to know how to hold your hips. You just have to have the musculature and the endurance to do so. But then I got a saddle that had a slope in the middle, and it forced me into an anterior tilt. I wasn't even aware of it. rode with back pain for the better part of a season, and then finally discovered when I went back to a flat saddle on a different bike, that was the problem.
There you go. I think a lot, you'll find yourself too, especially like it seems like at the end of the season or the beginning of the season, people have developed bad habits. And over time, then they start to really like manifest themselves in a lot of ways like this.
Yeah.
And for another thing, and this is like so assuming that you have sufficiently strong trunk, you're doing the sort of exercise you need to do to have just a balanced body in general for a cyclist. Still probably very imbalanced by normal people's standards, but a balanced body. Assuming that's all the case, one thing I've found that actually caused some back pain at Tahoe Trail was I was putting water bottles. I had a 2-in-1 skin suit on, so it was pretty tight. It wasn't like I had a loose jersey at all. And I was putting water bottles because I only have one bottle cage on my bike. So I was putting them in my jersey pockets, and that subtle pressure,
but
it was like
real.
just consistent pressure. And it wasn't a ton. It wasn't like, ow, that really hurts. And I put it in my jersey. It was fine. Yeah. But over the course of the ride, it really started to cause, I feel like, excess tension in that area.
Yeah, and
sure.
Also consider just the flexibility of your hip flexors and your quadriceps, because those two will pull. Some of your psoas or some of your hip flexors are actually attached to the lumbar spine. Yep. So if they're short the whole time and in a seated position on a bicycle, they're short most of the time. Even when you stand, you can't really open up your hips.
Yep.
It could be because they're overly tight.
Yep. Two last things. One person pointed out that Van der Poel is Dutch. Yes, he is. I don't know why I thought he was Belgian. Yeah. But then the final point, Jonathan's thoughts on e-bike, mountain bike world championships, the race at Mont Saint Anne 2019. I think it's awesome. I like e-bikes. I think they're great. So you won't get any sort of like tirade from me on e-bikes. I love them.
I have a question for you two that we can end.
Okay.
There's currently, we talked all about this nutrition. There's currently a sandwich war going on between Popeyes and Chick-fil-A.
Is that what's going on?
We are going to go to Popeyes and try it out, or I'm going to.
Yeah, I'm
Do
not.
I call you guys in? Are you guys going to come?
No way.
No?
No
Just
way.
one sandwich?
Nope.
Anything fried.
Yeah.
I don't eat fried food.
You take all the fried off.
Nobody should eat fried food.
Not ever? Not once? I'm never going to see you eat a French fry?
I'm not saying I won't, but I'm saying I shouldn't.
Oh, we all know this.
Yeah. But I'm not going to eat a whole sandwich. A whole
This
sandwich
is like
would wreck
speeding.
me.
You shouldn't speed either.
No. I can't.
It's true.
I can't. A whole chicken sandwich, deep fried.
Yeah, I'm out at Popeyes. I'm not doing it. No,
Okay.
Can't do it.
Okay.
But let me know how it is. I'm interested to hear.
We will.
That's yeah. Everyone's going to be waiting on bated breath for this one for next week. So, okay. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube, a thumbs up really helps. Check out those race analysis videos that we've been putting up and we're constantly putting up, especially the ones that we just did with Richie Rude. Also, go to trainerroad.com. It'll make you faster. We genuinely guarantee it. It'll work. So give it a shot, and we appreciate it. Talk to you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.